welcome once again. Gabbols.
We start and he's already hurting himself.
You okay there, Gabbols?
Yeah, I hit my leg.
Oh, poor thing.
Ow.
Don't die, Gabbols. We need you to finish the video.
You're our
Right.
token. We need you.
There's
Our
shit in the
token-
way. I'm sorry.
Token something. Well,
Or token
Norwegian.
Usually
European.
or token European, yeah. I was gonna say token femboy, but now we have. Yes, so
I would say a better
Yay.
femboy.
better.
Oh. Oh, wow.
We're ranking them now.
We've moved up the world. We have 2 femboys now.
Yes, so
Yeah, we're fine. Your
How
guys
we
are finally
usually-
based, not cringe.
how we usually start is by just going down the row and briefly saying hello. So with Tennyson still coming, he's just having some technical issues, but hopefully he'll join us soon. But without him, the most left person is Zera.
Hello, and that is also probably accurate.
Most left. Gabbols is pretty left.
I'm right-handed, though.
Right hand.
I'm a righty left.
Righty-lefty.
Anything people should know about you since you haven't been on the
No, nothing interesting.
zero interest?
You're just
Um,
some person we picked up off the
Yeah,
street.
I am
for
the
no particular
blandest
reason.
person you'll ever meet.
Wow. Yeah, we found Zera out on the street panhandling for crack money.
They offered to give me warm soup in a bed, so I took it.
Yeah, and that was a lie, by the way, but it's too late.
I
You can't
know
back
the
out.
soup's literally ice, and the bed is nothing but 2 straws.
Well, you're here now, so you can't back out. Well, anyway, welcome, and go to Gabbols.
Hello. Ahoy hoy. I'm Gabbols. Yeah, I've been on the show a couple of times. Pretty quiet. But that's okay. I'm from Europe, so that's, I'm shy. You
you're-
guys talk a lot.
Currently being threatened by Russia, right?
Oh, yeah, it's super fun. Oh, it's so good.
So-
We live next door to Russia, so well, you guys do too.
If at any point you cut out, we'll know the bombs have landed.
Yeah, I'll just blink 3 times really fast to signal the nuclear strike.
All right, Gemini.
Hello. I don't know what to say.
It has now been confirmed that you are not, in fact, Gabbols.
And that's
Yay,
enough
I'm
for
not
you.
Gabbols. I can prove that I am
For
not.
every
Yeah,
episode,
finally.
He was on, you were not. So, yeah, a bit of a conspiracy theory there, but no, you are in fact 2 different people.
Yes, it's true. I'm not a femboy.
You're just a regular homosexual.
I wouldn't say regular homosexual, but I'm definitely not a femboy.
All right. You've not received the sissification porn yet.
Oh God, no.
It's in the mail.
All right, Danimal.
Hey, hi. This is this is my first time on the podcast. I've never been here before.
Yeah, so what's your deal?
Oh, just a normal guy. Not much.
Right.
Unironically, the most normie among us.
That's probably true. You're like the most
Yeah.
cis heteronormative. Like,
Homosexual man you ever met.
God, stop being such a het.
being such a het.
You know what's funny? I did get in a fight with a guy over a YouTube comment section about like drag queens and kids cartoons or whatever. And he was like, God, you're such a boring gay. And just like, oh yeah, I better dress myself up like a cyberpunk clown so nobody thinks I'm boring. Oh boy.
Oh man, it sounds like Cyberpunk was satirizing that or something.
Hmm.
Almost.
That leaves me, khavvah, your hostess. Yes, and so this is 3 homos and a pussy. Except we have a little more than 3 this time. We got a full panel, which is great. Might be a little fuller in a second here. We are covering a topic that I don't think we've covered before.
Yeah. And it's something we've talked about in the past, but never in depth.
So this video in particular is on detransition. It's a pretty hot topic. It's a topic that's been floating around for a while. When I was looking for videos on it, there's of course a gajillion videos of people who have actually detransitioned and talk about their experience. But this video is a little different. This video by Arthur Rockwell entitled Detransition, a video essay. This is a video by a trans man. So this is not a detransitioner. This is someone who is trans who's trying to think through these issues of detransition. And they're going to make recommendations and observations about that. And when I watched it, I found it a mixed bag. I know, Danimal, you watched it.
Yeah, it definitely is a mixed bag.
Because there's some really, I think, generous points and good points, and then there are parts that are weaker, or I think, we could dispute.
Yeah, definitely parts that aren't as thought out as the other parts.
That is the video. So at this point, I think we can just dive right in unless anyone has anything. So I don't know. Well, I know somewhat of other people's experience, but I can't speak to everyone on the issue of detransition. All I know is really that this is an issue that I've been following for quite a while. I follow Benjamin Boyce's channel. I've watched a lot of those interviews, and I follow a number of detransitioners on Twitter. And I hear a lot of the conversations that go on in that space. So I'm familiar with a lot of that. I've never personally known anyone in that situation, but that's kind of my background on it. Anyone else? Or do we want to just dive right in?
I mean, that's probably the same way I came to it,
Let's dive into painful mediocrity.
Yeah, that's...
I mean, that's basically what he's always been.
Hey, there he is. Alrighty, let's roll.
Trans discourse around detransition either tries to claim that detransition never happens, or that detransitioners were never truly trans to begin with. I'll first explain why these two statements are inaccurate, then I'll talk about why I don't think they would be appropriate things to say to someone who's questioning whether they should transition, even if they were true. And lastly, I'll talk about how I think about transition regret, and some strategies for you to try and make sure that your transition is a healthy one.
So I'm just going to pause it right off the bat, honestly. So trans. He's clearly going at it from it being an identity instead of a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody want to add anything to that?
We should probably start up by setting up our direct definitions of the word we'll be using.
Sure, yeah. I mean, Kav, I know that you're working on a video about this topic. What conclusions have you come to for your kind of definitions around this nebulous web of words?
I've come to the conclusion that people are working with multiple definitions. There's sort of these two different groups. There's the old school and the new school, essentially. You got the old school, think of trans as a part of a medical diagnosis, such as gender dysphoria. It is, in some sense, a treatment for gender dysphoria to transition. So it's not as much a identity thing as it is a medical treatment. And then you've got the new school, the transgender movement now, which is more claiming that transness, sort of this innate, but also not innate, the sort of pseudo-innate status that you can just identify as. It's part of introspection. You look inside of yourself and you say, I really identify as this. And that's the process of becoming trans. So when it's really nebulous like that, obviously, you can do all the self-introspection you want and come to very different conclusions because it's very personal.
Yeah, so like gender self-ID stuff.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And xenogenders and things like demi-boy.
So I guess I'm part of the old school then, because I consider it a medical diagnosis.
I'm in the middle because I'm fairly transhumanist. I believe if you're an adult, you should be able to do whatever the fuck you want with your body.
Yeah, there's definitely an argument.
See how
there.
Questions about detransition are necessarily inappropriate to ask.
Nope, they're not inappropriate to ask at all.
I mean, that's sort of what you do with any other medical or psychological diagnosis. You have to rule out all possible external causes so that you can determine by process of elimination what is or isn't the case.
Right.
Exactly.
Especially if you're doing a severe treatment regimen.
Yeah,
Which physical transition is a severe treatment. It's a lot of surgery.
And we'll see as this video plays that this particular presenter doesn't quite view it as that severe, as kind of just a stepping stone to figure out who you are. But I think based on Kav, especially what you and I have watched and read, that it's a little more than just a self-identity journey or something like that. I mean, something going through transition is a major medical procedure.
Yeah, and I think sometimes they even say, like, it's just hormones. As long as you just do hormones for a while. You can always get off hormones. And
That's just sweet.
some effects
Since
are
you really
reversible.
can't fully get off them, though, because I mean, their hormones are surprisingly powerful in ways that most people don't even think about because they take it for granted, right?
Yeah.
The amount of influence that androgens and estrogens have on the human body and how it develops, even into adulthood and old age, is kind of fascinating and incredibly complex. It's not just you grow hair and your voice gets deeper and you get taller or whatever, like we commonly think of what adolescence is like. There's a lot more to it than that.
And it's relatively recent in terms of our understanding of it. I mean, the field of endocrinology is not that old.
Not at all.
If you spend enough time in LGBT spaces, it's obvious that people detransition. When I was in high school, I didn't identify as transgender yet, but I knew 4 people who did. Out of those 4 people, 1 of them still identifies as transgender. And given it's been like 8 years, so that's quite some time, but still, pretty high detransition rate. If you go on Twitter or Reddit, you'll see active, thriving communities with hundreds, if not thousands, of detransitioners. When I was questioning whether I should transition, I made a blank Twitter account where I followed a ton of detransitioners, everyone that I could find, and I was following hundreds. They had very different stories, they were very different individuals, but they were all definitely real people and definitely had detransitioned. Often when trying to claim that detrans people are incredibly rare, trans people are not pointing to the accounts of these people, because clearly when you hear someone talking about their experience as a detransitioner, they do exist. The first study I'll talk about, I'm gonna butcher these authors' names, Davies, McIntyre, and Ritma. So these authors get a less than 0.1% detransition rate that I see thrown around a lot. But how did they get this? They have patient intake reports from a gender clinic. So these are people who are actively seeking gender-related care, and then they scan the text of these reports for people who mention regret. I don't think that they were claiming that this is a population-level detransition system.
I just want to point out that Davies report that he's referencing, they also only talk to the gender specialist or the surgeons that worked with the people that received the gender dysphoria diagnosis. And typically when people are transitioning, they're not going back to the same care provider that they did before. At least that's what I've learned through watching, I don't know, 50 some interviews and reading tons and tons of.
I think they even mentioned that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, but that's another component to the study that he's kind of talking about here that he doesn't quite mention.
I wonder if the reason that people who deny detransitioners don't go to their personal accounts is because, well, I mean, have you read some of these accounts? I have, and I think Danimal read some as well, and they're frankly terrifying. They're nightmarish to read.
Yeah. I mean, it's people. Go ahead, Gav.
Yeah, if you get abused by a caretaker, you're not going to go back to that caretaker.
Yeah, and it's
away from them.
Very easy for, I guess, activists who want to push a certain point of view to just use a single statistic or a group of statistics, because you can twist statistics to suit any kind of purpose that you want, which makes them kind of fallible, despite being quote unquote objective data. And it becomes a problem when you're using statistics to determine that to argue that your view is the only correct one, especially when there's such limited data on this topic in particular as well.
This is where metadata would come in handy. We don't have enough studies to form a good metadata analysis. You're kind of working blindly.
Yeah, I was actually wondering if this study has even been replicated, because if not, it's kind of not something that can be validly used inside the discussion, right?
I mean, I'm sure it can be replicated because it's only looking at a very narrow data set. It's only looking at gender specialists whose patients have come back to them with wanting to detransition. And like I said, that's usually not the case that they'll go to the same gender specialist they did before.
Yeah, and even in this study, I think they said that it's even weaker than that. It's just scanning the reports for mentions of regret. They don't actually ask the people, how do you feel about it? They just go back to their records.
I mean, you can probably replicate the study, but the methodology is very weak and very unsound.
But clearly, this method of scanning the texts of people who are continuing to seek gender care is not the best way to find out people who have stopped seeking gender-related care, who have stopped transitioning. That statistic is not what you think it is. It is not saying that 0.1% of people detransition. It's saying 0.1% of people who are actively in gender-related care mentioned regret to their caretaker. So, that's a pretty specific statement. Other studies have very high dropout rates. A study by Smith et al. From 2005 starts out with 325 transgender adults, and then by the time that they are evaluating the success of treatment, less than half of those adults have remained in the study. Some never started hormones, and some just dropped out. So we don't know what happened to those dropouts. Did they detransition? Did they just lose touch and have better things to do than follow up with these researchers? We have no idea. And it's such a high dropout rate that we just cannot say anything conclusively about a 1% detransition rate.
So when he says dropout rate, is he referring to dropping out of the study or dropping out as in detransitioning? Okay.
No, dropping out of the study.
Or off the face of the earth.
In other words, we don't know what happened to them. And it's a big problem with all these studies. They do tend to lose track of people after they've transitioned them. I think a lot of the major studies where they try to track effectiveness have that issue.
Well, yeah, I mean, you usually see sample sizes in the low hundreds, if not under 100 for a lot of these studies, if not under 50.
Oh, wow.
And that's part of the reason is because there's a high dropout rate. Oh, we just lost somebody.
Speaking of dropout.
He'll come back.
There he is.
Oh.
Hey, Tenny, you back?
Yeah, but fuck whoever provides my whatever internet provider I have. I forget.
Have you. The last research study I'll talk about specifically is the one that I see discussed the most in trans spaces, which comes from the US Transgender Survey. Off the bat, the problem with this you can hear in the name, which is it's from the US Transgender Survey. They are not keeping up with people who have detransitioned and are presumably not involved in trans spaces. So even still, they get a pretty high detransition rate. So they have 8% of these trans people surveyed have a history of detransition, which I think is pretty crazy. And a lot of trans people will try to soften this by saying that most of these detransitions are reported as temporary or due to transphobia, lack of medical care, or other sort of factors that we think of as like not because you weren't truly trans. But even still, it's a pretty serious detransition rate, 8%. For those people who are detransitioning and then retransitioning, that's a pretty traumatic experience to go through. So even though this survey has only focused on people who identify as transgender, I don't think that the results are that strong on detransition never happens. There are many studies that I have not discussed besides these three that have...
Can we talk about that U.S. trans survey for a second? Because that's something that cropped up in another survey set, or another study that I was reading where it's about how, kids who receive transition treatments have a better outlook in life. But the problem with that U.S. trans survey is that I believe it's typically online, and there's no controls around who takes it or how many times they can take it. And there's often like conflicting data in it, where it'll be like somebody will mark that they're 17, but they talk about receiving puberty blockers at 17. And it's like, well, you're not receiving puberty blockers at 17. So there's issues with the way that survey is taken as well.
I think it's the same thing with the suicide rate surveys they do. Another online survey, and one of the questions, the criticisms that I saw was that it would just ask, have you ever tried to commit suicide? But then if you actually try to differentiate and try to pinpoint, did you actually commit self-harm? Did you cut yourself? Did you do these specific things? Then you find out most of those who said yes to did I try to kill myself actually are just talking about general self-harm. They weren't serious suicide attempts. So there's a lot of like things being conflated, not being properly vetted.
Yeah. And why is that? Why is there not a more rigorous data collection methodology around this kind of stuff? That's obviously a very serious issue to a lot of people, and it's very serious to especially the activist portion of this. Why is that? Why is there such a lax methodology around this data collection?
It could be because of how small the sample size is overall, due to how small the population of transgender people are. So they feel like they have the need to cast a net as wide as possible regardless of how high quality the quality of the data.
Yeah,
But that's just a guess.
I could see that. Yeah, because it is a very small population. Do we think, because it's in the back of my mind, do we think that it's maybe ideologically driven too, for a more laxer methodology, that they want to receive a certain result, so they will cut corners in certain ways to ascertain that result that they want?
I don't know. I want to assume it's not, though.
Yeah.
Always tricky.
I feel like it would be very counterproductive because it's definitely not the results that they're getting are not productive towards that point.
Sometimes. I think specifically with the suicide and outcomes question, it's pretty easy to design a survey that pushes in one direction, like the way the questions are written. It's pretty easy to make them biased. The way the questions are asked, the phrasing, all that. There's highly specific scientific field concerned with just the design of studies like this to ensure accurate responses because of these problems. There could be an ideological bent. I think there's the other question too, which is, are they getting serious funding for these questions? That might be more where the ideological bent is coming from. The fact that we can't get serious studies done.
But
Because
we
it
do see, but on the other side of the coin, in terms of activism, we do see tons of money pumped into that. I mean, the HRC a while ago, the Human Rights Council, which is like hugely funded, funds a ton of local gay groups, tons of that. They said that they're not funding any group unless they have trans issues within everything that they're doing, either at the forefront or within everything that they're doing. So there is money in the activism, but I guess there's not money in the research.
The serious research. Just try to study the mechanism of gender dysphoria. You'll probably quickly find out.
I mean, I know people say that around studies on like homosexuality, where they're like, oh, well, those studies are always underfunded and all that kind of stuff, but not really. I mean, there's tons of major studies on homosexuality that pretty much all kind of conglomerate around the same conclusions. I mean, I've seen some that are put forward by like the Family Rights Council that are kind of bullshit. But yeah, I mean, like I've seen major studies around homosexuality, but I haven't seen a lot of major studies around gender dysphoria. But anyway, we can keep going, I guess.
Problems with them, like they count only people who legally changed all their documents, then legally changed them all back, or these studies are from the 90s when transition was way less prevalent, or they only document people who went to pursue detransition related surgeries from the same surgeon that they originally went to, which is of course like many detransition people decide to try to like accept their bodies as they are and would really not pursue any further modifications to their bodies. So we don't know from these studies that detransition is extremely rare or that it doesn't happen. In fact, it does happen, and it's probably not extremely rare. That's what we'd expect. Transition is in part an identity choice and in part a medical treatment. Medical treatments don't work for every person. Similarly, people's identities change over the course of their life. That makes sense. That's natural. Some people are going to detransition. That's just the way of life. And we shouldn't be trying to claim that there's a less than 1% detransition rate. There just isn't. Don't say that.
See, these are all valid reasons. These are all valid things to say regarding detransition. It's just that, and I don't see how you could construe that as in any way objectionable.
Yeah, I mean,
I would agree with everything that's been said. That was sort of the surprising part. I was watching this and being like, oh, well, I kind of agree with everything so far.
I mean, it is, yeah, it's well said, and yeah, I do agree with everything, but I don't think that we're going to dive into the specific thing that I would like tackled, which is the identity part of it.
It's interesting they did mention it's in part a medical treatment, and it's in part an identity. I think they even said choice, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And again, that's the weird split. It's the conflict that's now existing in trans spaces. You got the one side that sees it as a medical treatment, and the other side says, no, it's really an identity choice. And your identity is this fluid thing that changes throughout your life. So it's only natural that sometimes you're trans and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're male and sometimes you're female. Sometimes you're non-binary. Very different conception of that. It's a very different conception of that. It's this very mutable thing, which is very
similar?
contradictory.
Yeah. Is it similar to like deaf culture? Because you know how like people who have deafness or are fully deaf, like there is a like where they will say that when you are receiving cochlear implants or things that improve your hearing from the point of deafness, that you're kind of eschewing this kind of deaf culture, and you know that is a thing that happens within the quote unquote deaf community. Is it kind of the same thing?
See them as slightly different. I don't know if anyone else knows a lot about deaf culture, but what I understand and what makes sense to me is that the reality of deaf culture is it is based around a language. They actually have a different language, which is ASL. It has a different grammar, it has a different structure, so in a sense, it makes sense that deaf people have developed another culture, because linguistically they are separated.
Is on the trans identity side of the coin, is there not a like kind of language around that though?
I suppose. Not quite as fundamentally. They're still speaking, and they're using jargon, so it's a little more like a religion than a total cultural difference.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
we gotta pause for a second. My cat is...
Aww.
She is crawling around my computer. Come
We're taking a pause for the audience because Kav's busy playing with her pussy.
pause. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Go assert your dominance.
Get the fuck out of the bitch. Get out of the thing. Get out.
Zera, what are you thinking so far?
It's an alright video so far. I have problems with how boring it is, but otherwise he hasn't said anything disagreeable.
I'll tell you what, it's not going to get more exciting. There's not going to be explosions or anything like that coming up.
Oh man, where are my explosions? Where's
There's no
my
big
loud
mechs.
music?
Big gunfight.
No, fortunately not.
All right, I'm back.
Alrighty.
If you spend time in detrans spaces just listening and watching, as I did for a very long time, you'll see that there's no one detrans narrative, just as there's no one trans narrative. Some detransitioners were hardcore, true scum transmed types who had crippling dysphoria, and were so disheartened by the fact that they could never become, cisgender, that they decided to just detransition. Some detrans people were more too cute types who didn't experience a ton of dysphoria, who took their decision too casually maybe, and who hadn't looked into all the effects of HRT. And there's everyone in between, saying that the second someone detransitions, they were never
Oh, should we actually explain all of these terms to people?
Yeah, because I'm not sure
True
what
scum and stuff like that.
Yeah, Kav, you probably know
Yes.
true scum more
True
than
scum,
any
yes.
of us.
True scum is the derogatory term that new transgender types levy at the old types. It's the trans medicalists. It's the person who believes that gender dysphoria is a medical condition, and that it has a biological cause. Some true scum, you can kind of divide them up. Some of them think it's just a symptom. It's not reflective of a deeper reality. It's just something your brain is telling you, so it's kind of like you fully are the sex that you are, but you just have this sort of inescapable delusion or mental illness telling you different. And then other true scum actually, they sort of identify transgenderism as, or at least gender dysphoria as, some sort of unknown intersex condition. So their theory is there's a male brain and a female brain, or there's something about your brain structure that makes you actually male in a female body, or vice versa.
Do you want to dive into that opposite brain thing? Because you posted something interesting in the DMs between us.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll cover that video at some point. It's a really interesting video because it really highlights the divide between the true scum, trans medicalists, who say gender dysphoria is a biological thing, you need to get it medically treated. And then you got the too cute types, which are referenced here, which are people without gender dysphoria who still want to transition.
Yeah, that are doing it for
They're doing it to
better fit an aesthetic identity.
Amorphous identity inside themselves that makes them trans.
It's not even necessarily the opposite sex, though, because we see that with the non-binary people.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's just qualities of the opposite sex they want to adopt. I don't know if you know these terms much, Zera.
I can only really make jokes about them since you literally said everything I know.
By all means, make jokes. That's what this is for.
True.
We're usually a lot funnier than this.
You have true scum, aka the normal people, and you have two cutes, aka the crazy people. Or something like that.
It's pretty succinct.
Yeah. Let's keep
trans to begin with is the no true Scotsman. Life is complex. Transition might be the right thing for a very long time in someone's life, and then things might change and it might no longer. And that's totally fair. I think it's fair for someone to identify who's detransitioned as saying they're still trans, or saying that they were trans, but now are no longer trans, or saying that they were never trans to begin with. I think that's their personal call to make. So just to give an example as to how messy this can get, I'll describe one sort of hypothetical person, but this is a narrative that I have seen in detrans spaces that feels quite common. So imagine someone who has experienced a ton of physical dysphoria. They really have hated their chest since as long as they can remember. You know, they think through it carefully, they
I just want to say one thing before we continue. It's interesting that he says physical dysphoria.
Yeah.
Mm.
socially transition at first, and then they decide to start medically transitioning. They have top surgery, they take testosterone, and for a while they're quite happy. They really have liked living in this role as a trans man where they're obviously masculine and they're like sort of passing, but they don't necessarily look cisgender yet, and they don't look straight. This person is only attracted to women, so they know that they're ultimately trying to live as a straight guy, and they're happy about that. They think that's really going to work for them. But then at some point, they hit year 2, year 3 of testosterone, and they really pass. I mean, they pass as a straight cis guy, and they didn't realize how alienating that was going to feel for them, and how serious and intense the ties that they had felt to the lesbian community had been, and how alone they feel now. And now that they're really living it as a straight guy in society, they realize they aren't really one. They did have physical dysphoria, and their transition really did help with their physical dysphoria, but socially there's somewhere in between. So they decide to stop testosterone and socially go back to living as a lesbian. But even still, things are complex. They love...
Doesn't that make someone not medically trans, but medically would they have body dysmorphia instead? Because I'm pretty sure that
I think there's, and I don't know, I have never read anything to do this, but it's just based on my own thinking. I think there's a lot of overlap between gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia.
Oh, gender dysphoria is theorized to be a more advanced form of body dysmorphia.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's just kicked to the extreme.
Yeah.
Or maybe even hyper-specific. You just have some people who just have body dysmorphia about a particular body part or overall about their body. And some people can develop it specifically about their sex traits.
Yeah.
Past genital.
There is something interesting, a thread that he kind of brought forth but didn't pull on, and his little hypothetical there. But the kind of like that you're lesbian or you're gay. And I just parsed through Christine Jorgensen's biography. She was like a famous trans woman from back in like the 50s, like post World War II, or like the Danish Girl, which was pre World War II. And if you read their accounts or their biographies, in both of those biographies, they talk about how they went to a psychologist, and the psychologist suggested that they were a homosexual man, and they like were disgusted by that diagnosis. They balked at it. They said, no, I'm a moral person. I can't be homosexual. So I wonder how much that plays into kind of somebody's gender image of themselves.
Right, is there a
That
sense
would all
of...
depend on wouldn't that all depend on things like religion and such?
Yeah, I mean, Christine Jorgensen was a very devout Christian.
Mm-hmm.
It could depend on religion. It could also depend on, I mean, there are people who aren't religious who still have sort of the disgust or revulsion. Well, I think it does seem like either homophobia or even not liking yourself as a woman in a society where females are, let's say, less empowered.
Disadvantageous.
Yeah. Would you say those feelings are internalized?
Could be. Could be could become internalized over time. Sense of, I don't want to be a lesbian. I want to be a straight guy. Well, isn't that an update? Isn't that an upgrade? You get to sort of the top of the hierarchy.
I don't know. That's interesting because I think of things like you hear when the I forget what that UK court case was over that group. Do you know what I'm talking about? The one Yeah, the Tavistock Center. And there was like supposedly a report of Tavistock employees or heard over saying like, oh, if we continue with this transgender thing with the kids, there's going to be no homosexuals left in the UK. Things like that.
A cure.
Yeah,
Very likely.
it's a
You
cure.
heard it here first.
Well, Iran sees it as a cure.
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I'm trying
yeah.
to avoid that.
I mean, there's accounts from people that fled from Iran that said, their family came to them and said, either you have SRS, sexual reassignment surgery, or we kill you.
Mhm.
Those are your two options. So that's definitely seen as a cure in some places. And I'm not saying I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying that I don't think that gender dysphoria is a thing or that it's all based on these other things. I think gender dysphoria is an actual diagnosis that can be ascertained, but I'm just thinking about all these other elements around it in the kind of milieu that it's talked about in today and all these different people that have come forward claiming a transgender identity that I don't know. I don't know what to think about it.
Love their deep voice, they love their top surgery results, and when they're alone with their partner, as many butch lesbians have done for decades and decades and decades, they have their partner call them he, him, and call them her boyfriend. In public, they go by she, her, and totally are, trying to be seen as women, but, they have this sort of nuanced relationship with their gender. How does this person identify? Well, I mean, it really depends on the person. You might have a label in your mind that this person might use, but I mean, there are lots of labels that this type of person might use. So they might identify as a detransitioned woman. They might identify as a dysphoric lesbian. They might identify as just butch, not butch woman, just butch. They might identify as a genderqueer dyke. They might identify as a non-binary lesbian.
Butch Hartman, I love his cartoons.
All of these just seem like different flavors of lesbianism. The examples that he's given, they just seem like different aesthetics that lesbians put on.
Well,
this is like how you can have different aesthetics that gay guys put on. You got your macho man, got your effeminate, your transvestite, your
otters, your twinks, your bears,
your otter, bear, and so on. Those are different. Those are just not really different categories that are distinct. They're just different aesthetics, different masks that you put on, different ways of wearing clothes and speaking and taking care of your body.
I mean, no offense or rudeness to him, but the hypothetical he brought up seems to be very more of a sexual thing than anything to do with identity or gender.
But is that not what a lot of the identity stuff is wrapped up in, is in sexuality?
I genuinely don't know.
Yeah.
It's way above my pay grade. Though I do find it fascinating just how kind of binary this is becoming.
Yeah, they can't quite sort out. This is the conflict between the binary trans conception and the non-binary xenogender conception. These two different groups, kind of within a group.
And also in this
always in conflict.
Yeah, and in this part of the video, he's just spiraling down the identity hole here because he's just talking about all the different ways that somebody can identify, and it's really a non-thing.
And all of those identifications don't change the biological reality. The biological description, which is a biological female that has had breast removed. That seems to be the gist of it. You're no longer on hormones.
This is entirely a tangent, but I do wonder if the reason why so many trans people still have dysphoria after they transition is due to their brain, them, while not consciously realizing there's minor differences between biological males and biological females, but they do subconsciously realize that, which continues their dysphoria. It's just a thought, but it might.
There's always a sense of inescapability, I think.
Yeah, I mean, even Blair White, I think in a Benjamin Boyce interview or maybe another interview, she was saying like I would rate my dysphoria like where I'm non-dysphoric at like 90% or 95% after transition.
Mm-hmm.
It mostly resolved, but there's some quality that gets a chase for the rest of their life. And I think in part because you never had it fully, you can never quite conceptualize what it is. You can always just redefine it as something a little out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
You're not born as a female, so you don't really have access to an understanding of what being a female is like, but you can imagine what being a female is like. You can have all these stories and narratives in your mind about it. But no matter how many surgeries you get and how much you adapt your behavior with training, trans people go through a lot of this training, voice training, train their body to move. There's always going to be that sense of maybe I can do a little more. Maybe I can pass a little more. I don't think that's something you can ever get away from.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's got to be rough. It's got to be rough on
Yeah.
the psyche.
At some point, you just kind of have to accept where you're at.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah, like somebody like Buck Angel, I think has. No, we mentioned Buck Angel in the past, but
They might identify as trans, detrans cusp. They might identify as transmasculine. They might identify as just female, like they don't feel comfortable with any sort of gender descriptors. They're like, I'm just female. They might identify as just a lesbian. Really, they might identify as anything. And this person might say that they are transgender but have chosen to detransition and live as a woman. They might say that they're just dysphoric. They might say that they were transgender but are no longer transgender. They might say that they were never transgender but were always a dysphoric lesbian. And I think any of those things are fine. Any of those things are valid. And I don't think it's our place to say whether that person is transgender, was never transgender. And a lot of detransitioners look like this. They took their decision very seriously. It was one of the most important choices in their life. And things just didn't pan out as they'd expected. Who can blame them? I mean, you don't know the way that life is going to take.
It's important, I think, to note that after getting done describing all these possible labels, all these possible understandings of what had occurred, even if the physiological process that underwent was the same. You got the surgery, you got this procedure done, and then you did this. Those are the underlying stable properties, but how you describe it can be like 50 different things. I think that really highlights just how little meaning is contained in the word transgender.
Mm-hmm. This is why the word transgender kind of frustrates me, because it encompasses more than just gender dysphoria, which is what the term transsexual was originally coined to go over, and it's just not helpful when discussing actual medical conditions.
But yeah, I feel like there is I feel like there is so much blurring the lines between diagnosis and identity that it's always been hard for me to parse, like, and this is probably one of the reasons why I'm probably the least pro trans person here. It's always been difficult for me to parse like what the fuck people are saying. So I'm learning more today about the separation in the camps than I've known before.
yeah, and go ahead, Zera. I didn't mean to step on you.
To be honest, I think the problem comes with the similarity of the terms. Like, I don't have a problem with anyone identifying as whatever they want, as long as it's not like pedophile, and doing whatever they want with their body. But when
So
it comes
Zera's
to,
okay with zoophiles. Let's just get that on record.
don't identify as that either, or necrophiles, or any other bad thing you want to bring up. In other words, listen here, you
Dang.
little shit.
You're just restricting my freedom.
Hey, man.
Damn you, libertarians. Anyway, I feel like there could be a better term than transgender in order to not accidentally obfuscate from the medical issues that people with gender dysphoria suffer from.
That's kind of my whole interest in this topic is is there a plane going over? Is that me?
Oh no, they're
No,
coming.
that was me.
Oh no, Gabbols. I don't know. That's kind of my whole interest in it is the medical treatments around it, because I feel like there's a lack in the efficacy of the medical treatments and the application of the medical treatments with a complete picture of the diagnosis, and I think that results in a lot of detransition.
Yeah, and I think if trans discourse had very firmly separated the idea of people with gender dysphoria who require medical care, who might need to transition, and sort of this trans identity group that don't have gender dysphoria, and say, okay, you don't need to have surgery prioritized. That should not be a priority. If you want to get it, you can, but you should be very clearly informed of all the risks that come with it, because the cost is way higher than probably what you're going to gain out of it, because you don't have dysphoria.
I was just going to say, and not just the mental or physical cost, but also the monetary cost, because it's still a super specialized surgery.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
And
it's a
for-
lot of stuff too.
Yeah, it'll take a lot of money, and I think a lot of people who are transgender do need to understand that. A lot do, mind you. It's only a minority that don't understand how expensive this stuff is. But I feel like the LGBT community could do a lot better at educating just how expensive, both physically and mentally and economically, transitioning actually is.
And risky. The risk of complications is very high with all of them. You're almost certainly, you think you're going to go in for one surgery, it's going to turn into 3 or 4 by the time you're done to correct whatever complications come from the first one.
Like the only surgery I can think that doesn't regularly have problems is mastectomies.
Even then, you
that's
can
just
end up
because
with nerve pain.
And that's
Yeah.
only because we've learned how to, humanity's learned how to do it because of breast cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I'm like really. This is the only real reason that I'm concerned about trans issues, because the
Yeah.
right really has this, like, not the moderate right, but the alt right really has it down that this is social contagion, and they're gonna hammer that point home that like a lot of this activism is harming children. They're gonna hammer it down and use that as a talking point until it stops being usable.
It's an
And I don't
effective
know how
talking
long
point.
it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I think
I mean,
the
all-
reason children are being transitioned more now, because it is an effective talking point. If your child doesn't transition, they'll kill themselves. Which is what doctors tell parents. You can have a trans child, or you can have a dead child.
That's what a lot of the ROGD parents that came out and started talking about it said that that's what medical providers told them.
They're like, oh, it's like a 95% suicide rate, so you better let them. It's like pointing a gun at your head.
Yeah.
The meme is 41. Get it right.
Jesus.
I know, even the doctors aren't getting the meme right. What the heck? I thought they were educated. All right.
They're
You want to
educated in
Yes, let's keep
biology,
going.
not meme culture.
we'll keep rolling.
Back to the video.
Take you. You can't know with certainty that transition is going to work, and they made the best choices for themselves, and it just didn't work as they'd expected. So a lot of detrans people were transgender, maybe still are transgender, but just didn't feel like transition worked. And so, I guess all in all, we know that we don't know that detransition never happens, and detrans people don't necessarily look all that different from us. They just didn't have the same results as we had, the same happiness with their transition. So maybe at this point, if you're someone who's questioning whether you should transition or is doubting your transition, you're feeling a bit scared. The studies don't say that less than 1% of people will detransition, and detrans people were not these glaringly obvious cisgender transgenders. What does that mean for you? I mean, it does mean that we can't know for sure if transition is going to work for us. Even some people who are detrans who knew about the concept of detransition when they were choosing to transition, who were incredibly confident in their choice to transition, even some of those people detransition, right? Like, there's no way, before you actually go through the experience of transition, up until the point that you die, there's no way that you can guarantee that your whole life you're never going to detransition, and that transition will always be the right choice for you. So, where do we go from here? Well,
So how does that butt up against the narrative that we hear around transition treatment and affirmation therapy?
If you don't affirm, they'll kill themselves. But also, they might just change their mind. This is
That's a
going to be
pretty
one
big
of
weight in one of the corners of there, isn't it?
It's going to be one of my complaints in my video. This idea of gender identity is this both mutable and immutable thing. It's this hard thing that you can't change. So conversion therapy is bad because you can't change it, but also it can change just by itself. And I don't know how those two things coincide. All the things that are contained in gender are things that can change. Your personality can change. Your aesthetics can change. You can change the things you like. Your fashion choices, your behavior, all that stuff. You can mature and become a totally different person. It's a weird two-sided thing. Where on the one hand, they want to say gender is this thing that changes a lot, but at the same time, if you don't affirm, they'll kill themselves.
I just this whole part of the video that he just went over, I just can't get it out of my head about the child being diagnosed with gender dysphoria and being told that this is what you need to do to feel right, you know. And just here's somebody that's gone through transition that I'm not sure how well read they are on the subject. I mean, I would assume they did it themselves, so they know kind of what the effects are and everything going on. That's saying, like, you know, it's not a permanent thing. You might choose to do it later. You might choose to detransition. You know, your identity changes as you grow. So I'm just thinking about these kids that are, you know, getting sterilized. And man, I just I mean, think about
it. That's your identity. That's
how
you're really this.
I mean, how old was Jazz Jennings?
I think they identified Jazz as trans at like 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, like, nope, you're actually a girl. That's it. You're gonna raise them as a girl forever. I don't know if other people have thoughts on this, but when does most of our personality develop? I feel like your personality is kind of solidified later in life, not early.
Yeah, I feel like every kid pretty much is the same when they're a child. You know, every kid likes Barney, every kid likes Sesame Street. You know, I'm sure it's changed now to like Daniel Tiger and Caillou or whatever, but
your brain doesn't even stop developing on average until you're like 25.
Yeah, so it's like 25 is when a lot of this stuff stabilizes out.
Yep, crystallizes, in fact, because you also don't, a lot of people don't even change after.
So this is where we launch into our screed about how people under 25 shouldn't be allowed to vote, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
All right. I got my notes.
30 is the cutoff.
25, the age of consent,
Don't get to
25
vote.
years old.
No, 30.
Oh, is that what that
30.
one crypto island meant? Honestly, I hope it is, because otherwise, woo.
By age of consent, you mean everybody below that age automatically consents, right?
No. We're not French here.
They consent to be child soldiers, and that's all they consent to.
They get a gun,
That's right.
and they can go kill enemies.
Joseph Kony, 2024. I'm voting for him.
Jesus Christ.
Transition never happens, or that detrans people were never trans. I don't think that these points are the right way to talk to someone who's questioning about a major life choice, as it is. So to make my point, I'm going to talk about another major life choice. So let's consider marriage. I think that marriage is one of the most serious choices you can make in your life. When you choose to have kids with someone, you are like really bound to that person for a very long time, right? Like, you know, that person can end up abusive, you can hate them, but you might still have to talk with them for your whole life. I mean, marriage has like legal consequences, social consequences, it has consequences about your autonomy, about your finances. It's a huge deal. So let's say you're talking to a friend and you're saying, okay, hello friend, my wedding's coming up and I'm getting cold feet. I don't know if I should marry this person. So imagine that person turns back to you and says, oh, well, you know, marriage has a 50% failure rate, so I don't think that you should get married. I mean, that's a pretty high failure rate. Okay, that would be a pretty weird thing to say, right? And let's say that 10 years goes by and you go to the same friend because you haven't learned your lesson, and you want to get some comfort, and you say, you know, hey, I went through a divorce. And that friend goes to you and says, well, I mean, if you divorced your spouse, that means you must have never loved them from the start, right? Like, so that's really a win because you were never in love. And then you say, no, I mean, I was in love and I knew them and it was a serious choice, and like, you know, I'm so grateful for a lot of things marriage gave me. I'm grateful we had these beautiful kids together. I'm grateful for our home. I'm grateful for the past 10 years. We just fell out of love, and you know, that happens sometimes. And then that person goes, oh, I mean, it must have been a huge mistake, biggest mistake of your life. I mean, you never loved them, you made the choice casually. At least please don't talk about, like, you know, your marriage and how it fell apart, because like us real married people, it really hurts the way that people view marriage, right? If you imply that marriage can fail, and you say, no, I'm like happy that I was married, it was the right choice for some time, I'm happy with a lot of the experience, I don't want to be married to my spouse anymore, right? So at this point, this friend.
So
thing is that there are people who actually make these arguments about divorce and marriage, and it's actually shameful. Because I remember a couple of years ago, I watched this segment from Adam Ruins Everything, and
oh god, I'm sorry.
It talked about Adam ruins marriage and divorce, and he said divorce is great because it allows marriages that it basically helps to end marriages that never should have happened. And I was sitting there thinking, how can you say that to like small children who don't understand why their parents are fighting and have to go to court? Should the kids have just never happened? You dick.
Yeah, it's consequences. But Zera, you were gonna say something.
I was gonna say, it sounds like his best friend is fucking based.
Yeah, based air horn.
I was gonna say, when they came back the second time, I got divorced. See, told you.
Yeah. But you know what? I mean, that does happen though, where people do get kind of married on a whim. I mean, I know at least one of my friends did, and we were all like, "Are you sure that this is the one? You'd known her for 6 months." And sure enough, they got divorced in less than a year.
Yeah, I mean, there are cases, and to tie it back to the metaphor that this person's employing, imagine you got married on a whim, and everyone encouraged you to do it, because you said, I'm in love, and they all said, yeah, you're in love. You should definitely get married. But you don't actually do any of the deeper thinking that you need to do. And they just push you towards this because you have this feeling that you're in love. You feel in love, so go get married. And then there was actually real material consequences to getting married. There's all this stuff involved that I wasn't ready for. No one told me about it. And it was a horrible decision. I actually regret getting married.
So like
and
a
then you say,
euphoria?
Yes. And then the same people who encourage you to get married are like, you were never in love in the first place, you idiot. You made the choice.
Or they're really pushing on you like, well, weren't you happy you did it, though? You had that experience, and now you know who you really are.
Yeah, now you know who you really are. Now you've learned.
But, I mean, the marriage analogy works for the point that they're trying to make, which is about the attitude around a detransitioned person and kind of how to think about it. But it is an imperfect analogy because
I think it's a good analogy for what they're talking about. I would just add that layer as well to describe another situation where people are pushed to transition based on very surface level feelings.
Yeah.
That aren't being examined.
Even kind of looking at the consequences of it, like, like marriage isn't going to cause your uterus to calcify. Yeah. And you require a hysterectomy, marriage isn't going to cause you to be infertile. Well, I know. I mean, it could, depending on how bad.
If someone gets stabbed. Then...
Yeah.
There are some consequences, but they're very different kinds of consequences.
Yeah, there's
physical transition comes with a lot of medical and financial cost.
Yeah.
Just like marriage.
It's a lot of things you can't really undo. And even divorce can be one of those things that ruins you for life, really.
I can be, absolutely.
It's also not a thing like, well, I got married for 10 years and it was right for me at the time, but now it's over and I'm gonna move on. Like, no, that's not gonna be how it works, probably. In all likelihood.
Friend is kind of like, well, this is like not the right way to talk to someone on either front. The same goes for transition. This is where we should distinguish between the idea of detransition and transition regret. In the case of this example, this divorced person didn't regret their marriage. They were happy with their marriage for some time, and it was the right choice for a while, and then it stopped being the right choice. No regrets. Some people remain married and have regrets about being in a marriage. Some people get divorced and really regret, like their partner made them worse in a lot of ways, and they regret that they ever married that partner. And the same is true for transition. There are some trans people who do regret their transitions. They just choose to continue living as trans, even though they're unhappy with their choice. And there are some detrans people who regret that they ever transitioned, and there are some detrans people who are really happy for what transition gave them. We should care a lot more about preventing transition regret than we should about preventing detransition. So it's worth mentioning, why is the reason that the way we talk about detransition is so different than the way we talk about divorce? Well, it's obviously because of transphobia, right? Transition is viewed as a hugely taboo, hugely stigmatized choice. And so admitting that a choice that no one wanted you to make didn't pan out is really embarrassing. It's really disheartening. Whereas you're so pushed by society to get married. It's more embarrassing to be 50 and never having been married than to be divorced. Getting divorced is seen as no big deal. Or, I mean, it is a big deal and it's very serious to a lot of people, but certainly not with the degree of shame that detransition bears with it. Even though detransition, because of
I just kind of want to talk about that for a second. Like this, sort of stigmatization of transition, and that certainly is the case in a lot of the culture, but do you feel that that's the case in the kind of culture where a lot of the trans ideology swims in?
I feel like it's kind of like there's still a stigmatization against both, but I feel like it's being a little overhyped, just a bit. Like I think that most people, while most people aren't having either opinion of being against or pro transition. Like for the most part, I think even people who don't necessarily like trans people, just don't understand the mechanics behind it and aren't pushing either way, except for like again with kids.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
a
the kid
different-
topic is
For sure. I think I mean, who's pushing what? That's the big question. It matters who in your social circle is pushing something. Because if society is pushing one thing, I guess you could say society doesn't really encourage transition. I guess we could agree on that. However, if you're in a tightly knit social group you are close friends with, and they are pushing it as sort of this cool thing, if you have feelings of dysphoria, quote unquote, whatever that entails, or if you identify a certain way, that might matter a lot more to a young person than just society as a whole.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot more. I think that's a lot more cogent of a point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people look at the wider society when they're making these points, but yeah, like you said, Kav, they're not really focusing in on, because what's going on in Maryland doesn't really affect me, but what's going on in my own friend group and my own family affects me.
I think it's interesting reading from different detrans people, especially girls, who talk about when they come out as trans, just the flood of positive affirmation that they receive. Not necessarily from their parents. Their parents are usually pretty skeptical, but the school they're at, just everybody is super excited about it. Congratulates them, gives them attention. All their friends give them attention. It's this big group hug, societally. And also that's a big impact, especially for young people with low self-esteem, who feel they haven't received the attention they want. Oh, if I identify a certain way, I can get a lot of positive feedback from people who usually ignore me, or maybe even bullied me. And it's interesting when you look at...
And honestly, I could see why a lot of people who, there's stories of detransitioners that were like, well, I just turned out to be just a gay man, or I just turned out just to be a gay woman. I can see why somebody who is pretty much going to end up, discovering that they're gay would fall into that kind of thing early in life.
You'd really think the false positives were as serious as the real positives. Because you're
Yeah.
literally being assigned the wrong gender then, aren't you? Like, you're literally being assigned the wrong gender.
Yeah, they seem to
You
not...
take hormones and you take surgery and all this, and then you suddenly, like, wait, this is fucked up. This is wrong.
And it's interesting when you look at... There was this tweet, this really disgusting tweet, and I'll look for it, where this trans activist was telling detrans people that the reason you're upset you have deeper voices, excess body hair, is because you think trans bodies are innately inferior. You just have transphobia. You just need to get over it.
Yeah, that was Milo Stewart, I believe,
Yeah.
of the Dennis Riley, Milo Stewart fame.
It's like telling detrans people that the fact that they're upset they had their breasts cut off is really their problem because they're bigoted.
Yeah.
It's like you talk all about this gender affirmation being important, but when their gender isn't being affirmed, you tell them to screw off.
Well, that's the case for
think
a
it
lot
also
of
has-
those types, is that only things they believe in should be affirmed.
Yeah.
I think it's more to do with like group dichotomies and tribalism, in that they feel like detransitioners are a point in the opposite team's direction inherently, so they hate them.
Threat. Yeah.
It's group threat. It doesn't matter that it doesn't matter that ideologically they are. It still should flow that they should support these people. It's group wise, they hate them because they their existence is a threat to their in group, regardless of the fact that they are ideologically consistent. It's kind of like
It's
how Nazis don't like other fascist groups.
well, I was going to say it's more like the X gays, although
Oh yeah, like
it's not
Mexican.
quite
That makes
it's not
sense.
quite a perfect analogy because the X gays typically are also coming out and saying like, well, there shouldn't be any homosexual people. Look, I did it. I'm able to control my feelings. Why can't you? And it's usually
Yeah.
a religious thing.
Ex-gays are usually politically motivated first, so it's kind of a
Yeah.
different situation.
Well, I wouldn't say politically, but religiously motivated. A lot of ex-gays, I would say, which is fine. I mean,
That's true.
I'm not gonna go after somebody's religion.
I don't know. Like maybe it's just because like I'm not very. I haven't studied that group very much, but it seems like every single one that ex-gay that I've seen, like a lot of times, if they're not like into politics themselves, being politicians, which I have seen a couple, but most oftentimes I see that they are politically active.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot that end up being ministers or pastors. But once again, I mean, it's usually if you really look at what they're saying or read what they're saying, they're not saying that they're not homosexual anymore. They're saying that they've controlled their feelings using
Yeah, they're not
faith
saying
or-
that homosexuality isn't a thing that they incorrectly believe about themselves. It's like, yes, I have these feelings, but I can control them, I can redirect them.
They look at the same, and they look at the lust of wanting to sleep with another man the same as they would lust of wanting to sleep with another man's wife.
Yeah. Although I
It's-
think Milo
it's
is
natural,
definitely
but
cured
it's
of
sad.
homosexuality, though. I think we're
Milo
all
is
agreed on that,
super
right?
cured. Like, have you seen him?
Oh my god, he's so straight, so straight.
What a straight
Greatest
man.
man in the world.
I've never seen
His
a man
straightness is an
so
example to
straight as
all of
that.
us gays that we should all follow.
Maybe
in.
one day we can fix ourselves.
Inshallah, as Allah wills it.
Not one cock in betwixt his lips.
Also, according to some communities, there are other ways to cure homosexuality too.
Yeah, usually is a few flights directly down off a roof.
I was
Transphobia carries a lot of shame. I think that I would recommend you to focus on just trying to minimize transition regret, which is the only thing you really have in control. Because how do you know that in 40 years you're not going to wake up and just be like, oh, I guess I want to detransition. I guess transition isn't working. You can't know that. You cannot know with 100% certainty what you're going to want in 40 years. You can just make the best choice possible today. And if you're making the best choice possible today, it's hard to have transition regret. So, what are the ways to minimize transition regret? I would break it into 3 categories. You should be making a well-informed, forward-thinking, and...
By the way, I know I'm stopping again really shortly, but I do really like the way that he's phrasing it, whereas you're not focusing on ending detransition, you're focusing on ending transition regret. I think that's a healthy way to view it.
Yeah, I very much agree with the way he's going about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
healthy choice. What does well-informed mean? That means really being aware of the consequences of any choice that you're making with regards to transition. So unfortunately, because trans healthcare is so understudied, that means doing the role partially of being your own doctor, right? So you have to learn all the effects that medical transition is going to have on you, learn about the risks, be thoughtful, and be on top of your own health. So I know in my own case, I have to remind my own doctor that I need to get my blood work done. And it's important for me to do that. I need to do that. Yeah, so you should be well informed about the choices you're making. The next is forward thinking. You're gonna have to, you're signing up to live your life as a trans person. You're not just completing a transition, boom, it's done, you don't need to think about it anymore. You need to think about the way that transition is gonna interplay with your future. Like, what's it gonna like to be, if you wanna be a parent, what's that gonna look like for you? If you wanna marry, what's that gonna look like for you? If what does growing old as a trans person look like for you? You should be thoughtful about all those things. I know in my own case, that meant that I chose to freeze my eggs because I didn't want to just push down the road what would having kids look like for me. And I knew having biological kids was important to me, and so I wanted to be forward thinking about that and not just push that off. And then the last point here.
Yeah, I actually really glad that he's giving this advice right now, because this is something a lot of people in general need to think about when they do life-altering surgeries.
Yeah.
You need to make sure you have every potential thought of. It's why if you're going to go into a really even a little higher than like 2% death rate surgery, you probably should have a will.
Yeah. I mean, I've had friends I've had a friend that went in for major heart surgery. They had a congenital heart defect that needed to be corrected. And they were married. And what they did before they went in for surgery was went and had their sperm frozen just in case, because they didn't have kids yet. But, just in case that they died, that the wife would have that option if she still wanted to, and they talked about that deeply. So even without these kinds of, I mean, when we're talking about gender transition surgery, let's not beat around the bush. We're talking about a surgery with a 100% sterilization rate.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, obviously that's going to be important to, preserve your gametes, but even that's not permanent. I mean, how long do frozen eggs last, Cobb? Do you know?
I don't. I know the complications increase over time.
Yeah.
Frozen sperm can last basically forever, funnily enough.
Eggs are more.
Oh, so I don't have to throw out all that stuff that's in my freezer. I can keep that.
As long as it's been frozen and you didn't accidentally put it in the fridge.
Sweet.
Eggs are more fragile. But yeah, I mean,
more
it
male
is
supremacy.
Good advice, and it's the kind of advice that I'm afraid a lot of trans people aren't taking. I think a lot of them are thinking very temporally. Like, I want this thing now. They're not thinking, okay, in 20 years, I might want kids. What should I do?
And that's kind of a mentality of the Gen Z and the millennials is like, well, I don't ever want kids. I want to have fun. And that's another thing that they kind of don't think about because they do it a little too young, I think.
I don't know about Gen Z. Gen Z has done a lot of 180s from millennials, but we still don't know what the fuck is going on with the weirdos there. In a lot of ways, like they are. I think they are supposedly more LGBT than previous generations, but at the same time, like, and they value human connections more. So a bunch of other bullshit.
You have to do the full acronym when you're talking about that, though, because all the things I see are LGBTQIA. So the queer in there, I think the queer identity is making up the lion's share of that.
I still don't know why it has transitioned, pardon the pun, to just being called the queer community.
I know.
Acronyms annoy me.
Oh, they annoy the shit out of me. I've said several times on this podcast how I will never fucking refer to myself by the alphabet soup acronym.
What's I?
Intersex?
Intersex.
It's usually intersex.
Yeah, but that's like a completely medical condition.
Yes. Not an
Mm.
identity.
Oh.
A totally diagnosable condition.
Yeah, a lot of intersex people also say that they're like, why the fuck are we part of this acronym? We don't.
I think the reason they're part of the acronym is because a lot of intersex people do end up doing similar surgeries to trans people in order to be whatever sex to present as much as the sex they identify as.
Yeah.
I think more importantly, activists find them useful.
Yeah.
In taking their condition and politicizing it is extremely lucrative.
I've heard that that the whole transgender thing has actually made it harder for intersex people to get the things they need.
Yeah, I've heard
Makes
that
sense.
too.
Filling up the queues with people basically getting elective surgery, while people who are biologically female but have some male secondary characteristics.
I mean, I am of the opinion that the whole acronym is purely political. That's just a political label. That like LGBTQIA community actually doesn't. That's not a thing. Gay men hate lesbians. Lesbians hate gay men. You
can't be friends.
We all know it.
Well, it's not untrue.
It's like the term Latinx and like how Hispanics are treated in general. They're extremely convenient at certain times and they're completely ignored at others. And how they're even a real group is kind of questionable.
Yeah. There are a lot of ethnic groups in there that don't necessarily fit.
Yeah, I'm not sure the Cubans
like
really
each
have
other.
a lot of love for the Venezuelans, and
Even like Asians got no love for each other.
What? There's never been any wars in Asia between the countries. What are you talking about?
Nope, I do not know of anything that happens to Name King.
Yeah, no, nothing happened in Nanking.
Making healthy choices, having a healthy transition. This is the one that I'm going to spend a lot of time on because this is a very nuanced and difficult topic. A common narrative around detransitioners who do not regret their transition is that they feel that transition allowed them to live a healthier and a happier life and ultimately put them on the right path. So for some people, what that looked like is they chose to transition when they were in a really deep hole in life. They were really suicidal, they hated their body, they hated their life, and transition allowed them to get therapy, support, it allowed them to feel that they had control over their future, and it really got them out of that rut. Now that they detransitioned, they don't identify as transgender anymore, but they're happy that they chose to transition because they're alive today, and they might have not been if they weren't allowed to transition. Even if that person doesn't still identify as transgender, I think that's a huge win for transition.
Do you think if they received alternative treatments rather than affirmation therapy that they would have felt the same happiness that they went through
all
that experience?
therapy and
Yeah.
No, you can't do that. That is conversion therapy.
I know. Yeah. Talk therapy is conversion therapy. Even though that's the basis for all psychoanalytical therapy, but
on the other hand, a common narrative around people who regret their transition and have detransitioned is that they felt that transition was unhealthy, almost like a form of self-harm for those people. So what that looked like for some people is they felt like transition was analogous to their eating disorders, that they would do things like binding, like taking testosterone, like, self-hatred while looking in the mirror, all those things from the perspective of being very angry with their bodies, being very like both dysphoric and dysmorphic, being like searching for something that was unattainable and really pushing themselves deeper and deeper into a dysphoric spiral. So they make comparisons to, say, online pro-anorexia communities, which foster more eating disorder style behavior, to their experiences of being in online transgender communities. And so it makes sense that if you felt like transitioning and being in online transgender spaces increased your dysphoria, made you have more body self-hatred, encourage your eating disorder, ultimately felt like self-harm, that you would regret your transition, because that sounds like a regrettable time. Or similarly, I saw someone who described their transition was inherently interwoven with a time where they were on drugs, working as a sex worker, and this was unwanted work as a sex worker. They associate their transition with...
I just gotta say it because it's super egregious right now, but the jump cuts are really killing me.
Mm-hmm.
It's
those
just, this is the worst that it
Zoomers
is.
love their
This isn't a Zoomer thing. This started with
Zoomer's
old
gonna zoom.
YouTube.
I think millennials started it, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Hey now.
Millennials killed everything.
Hey now!
Millennials killed the radio star.
They sure did.
Millennials kill the radio star. Well, they kind of did, didn't they?
They sure did, yeah.
Yeah, radio's pretty... Now it's podcasting. Hi!
Podcast
Hello.
killed
Hey.
radio.
Hey, hello, we're on the radio. We got a long set of rock and roll favors for you right here on the Burbs.
So let me guess, you did radio before.
No, I never have.
Why the hell?
In fact,
are
this
you
is my
good at
first time
radio?
speaking
Shit.
English. All
Why
right.
is your English better than my Swedish?
Oh,
a
because
voice for radio, a face for radio too, but definitely.
I do have a face for radio. That is true.
I have a face for radio and a voice for books.
I
Well, I guess with audiobooks that doesn't work anymore.
got a face like a dollop of mashed potatoes that roll around on a barbershop floor. It's kind of what
You
I
got a
look
voice for sign language.
like.
There we go. That's the new.
A blind person would find me very attractive.
being addicted and with being in poverty and in pain, and ultimately also with not searching for the one thing that mattered the most to them, which was how they could have biological children. They just kept on pushing that off and not thinking about the ways in which their medical transition interplayed with their fertility. So it makes sense that that person would also regret their transition, because it doesn't sound like the transition was a good time. Some detrans people will explain their dysphoria after the fact as having originated from an external source. So that could be anything. It could be from homophobia, it could be from sexism, it could be from sexual abuse, it could be from child abuse, it could be from depression, it could be from an eating disorder. really anything that makes you feel like you hate yourself or hate your body could be the cause of dysphoria. Some trans people, and even myself included actually in the past, will encourage people who are questioning whether they're trans to try to prod into whether their dysphoria also might come from one of these external sources. But I've kind of questioned this now, and I do not think I would recommend this now to someone who's wanting to know whether they should transition. Why would I not recommend you try to see if your dysphoria comes from one of these sources? Well, okay, I would, I guess.
I think this is the point in the video where both me and Kav, who've watched this before, kind of think it goes off the rails a bit, right?
Yeah, do not do this, do not do this, do not do this, do not do this.
Well, you can kind of do it, but also don't do it.
Dear Lord, if you think someone might be developing dysphoria from things like this, please do not encourage them to continue. Please tell them to seek help. Please, dear Lord, you're just going to probably kill someone.
But I wouldn't recommend you look into the source of your dysphoria for the sake of determining are you truly trans or not. First of all, I wouldn't recommend this because I think it's not going to be productive, which I'll explain. But then secondly, I've gained a better understanding of the history of conversion therapy. So I know that this is like a bit of a controversial subject, but I think that trying to explain your gender nonconformity or your transness as originating from many traumas really is reminiscent to the the good old days of conversion therapy for gay, lesbian, and bisexual kids.
Yeah. Do we want to? We touched on this a little earlier, but do we want to go deeper into it? Go ahead, Zera.
Oh fuck! I've lost the train of thought. Fuck! Can someone go first?
Is it conversion therapy to try to prod at the cause of gender dysphoria?
Oh hell no! That's what a good therapist should do. That's how you discover if someone actually has gender dysphoria or not.
Or the treatment for the gender dysphoria, if it's maybe coming from something else. Because I've listened to people who were prescribed affirmation therapy, but they decided not to continue with it because through talk therapy, they discovered that their dysphoria really stems from when they were raped as a child. I know that that's a bad thing because, we're kind of tying it into homosexuality as well. But, that they really didn't like their female body just because they kept thinking about that and they just wanted to get out of their female body. And that's kind of where their dysphoria came from over their gender and why they wanted to seek getting away from that.
Oof. Jesus.
There is, and I've heard this from Twitter Spaces, a lot of convergence between gender dysphoria and eating disorders and other forms of mental illness. These have a lot of bleed over, in part because eating disorders are pushed as a way to engineer your gender presentation. Like for girls, they'll starve themselves to be more androgynous, to reduce their breast tissue, and boys will starve themselves to get that sort of twink look.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is not advising someone to go seek therapy, non-affirmation therapy is kind of like encouraging an eating disorder. In that you're encouraging very negative behavior that could be treated one way just because you feel like it's similar to conversion therapy.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think you misspoke there. That you're saying that encouraging them to go to a therapist that only will affirm is a bad thing. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's part of the problem with comparing gender dysphoria treatment to homosexuality, like a conversion therapy. In one, you're trying to convert a homosexual to a heterosexual. You're actually trying to convert an innate property, which is attraction. Attraction in itself is not a destructive trait. It's something people have.
What if it's furries?
Even furry attraction in itself is not destructive. Just a thing. It just exists. It's just there, right? Now, the behavior you do with it, that's where you want to be sure you're doing things that are good and not harmful and healthy. But that in itself, it's not harmful. But when you're talking about gender dysphoria, what are you trying to convert? You're trying to make them stop feeling bad. It's the dysphoria that's the problem. You're not trying to change some innate property about what they are. You're trying to make them resolve feelings of negativity, which is what all therapy is. which is what all therapy should be about. You could stay the same person, you could keep even identifying however you want. But if you can resolve the gender dysphoria, that's really the goal. And if that requires looking back on trauma, oh, that's why you feel so bad about your biological sex.
And to be clear, the interview that I listened to, I mean, that's the first time I've ever heard that gender dysphoria came from like that type of trauma, but I've definitely heard it come from like people who have deep depressive episodes or people who have deep bipolar, really extreme bipolar.
The kinds of conditions I've heard about trans people having, like PPD is a big one. I've heard of
That's borderline personality disorder.
Yeah. Well, that one's really interesting because if you look up the definition, it's not a very well understood condition, but it has a lot to do with becoming a persona for people. You become the persona you think the other person wants to see.
I thought that was just called women.
Women have, that's the thing though. Women have BPD a lot more. And it's this really, you have this fractured sense of self. You don't have a stable identity. You're just kind of morphing as you go along. So it's like, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of women with BPD develop feelings of gender dysphoria. Like they just feel totally detached from their sex and feel like they don't have a sense of self anymore.
And we have seen a large influx of especially teen girls transitioning to male or even identifying as non-binary. But
yeah,
we've already covered that topic, and I think that's separate from the topic of this video and somewhat.
This is a binary.
I read a book which is called The Miseducation of Cameron Post. It is a fiction book, yes, but the authors really researched conversion therapy. In the section where the protagonist is attending conversion therapy, there's a long amount of time where the characters have to come up with the iceberg of where their same-sex attraction comes from. So on the top of the iceberg, they would put same-sex attraction, and then beneath it, they'd be like, what are the true causes? And it's basically all the same stuff you see.
Mine came from Harrison Ford's sweaty chest in Star Wars. Let's keep going.
It's entirely understandable.
People attributing their gender dysphoria or really their gender nonconformity to originate from, which is bad relationship with your parents, sexual abuse, sexism in society, all of that same stuff, eating disorder, depression, all of it attributed to same-sex attraction. And we would never encourage anyone to do that these days. I think the way it gets complex is that
someone has negative feelings about their homosexuality. Would you not look at where are those negative feelings coming from?
Right.
And
well,
if you're giving therapy to a trans person, you're not there to cure their gender nonconformity.
There used to be something in the DSM after homosexuality was taken out of the DSM in 1973. They replaced it with something called SOD, sexual orientation disturbance. And that was people that experienced extremely negative things around their sexual orientation. And it got taken out of the DSM in the early 90s because it was being misappropriated to put forward things like the conversion therapy he was talking about earlier, to kind of give it a scientific basis when there really wasn't any. But yeah, that was a diagnosis where people would look into why are you experiencing these feelings around your orientation.
If someone was depressed and the therapist found out and they looked into your past, I think they would. They would encourage you to explore and resolve it.
Now, the way when SOD was taken out of the DSM, the way that psychoanalysts and therapists kind of tackle those things is not looking to change your orientation, but looking to change your perception of your orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how SOD was used back in the 80s before they took it out.
It is true these different factors can increase people's gender dysphoria. And it is true that some people are confusing these different traumas with gender dysphoria. That's all true. If you approach looking into these very serious and very complex issues, which every person has faced, if you've just lived in society, you've experienced sexism, you've experienced homophobia, setting some sort of bar of you have to have all of those things be clear, no mental health issues to transition.
I heard pause.
Cav, you need to make the thumbnail him in Joker makeup because we live in a society.
We live in a society. Or George Costanza. We live in a society.
I mean, no one's going to meet that ever. But if you approach these questions from a, am I truly trans or not, you're never going to get anything out of that. You'll always be on the defensive mode. This is why I am in favor of informed consent for hormones, because all the time I'll see people talking about how they have to be reserved with their therapists because their therapists are gatekeeping them to the hormones that they really need. And so they can't actually make progress on these serious issues because they don't want to be denied and they don't want to admit that they do have other things going on. I would really recommend you work on your mental health and you work on your history with trauma.
I think it's pretty bad that he views therapists, as gatekeepers to this. I mean, there's a reason for that gatekeeping there.
I was about to say that's literally their job.
Right.
Yes,
But,
like it's
medicine should be gatekept.
like it's
And there's a reason
antagonistic.
we don't just hand out prescriptions to people who are addicted.
Right.
And this is sort of typical for trans activists. They really do coach people on how to get the things they want without triggering those gates, so to speak.
Yeah,
There are lots of guides online to how to answer questions at the clinic to make sure you get your hormones.
Absolutely detest that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a cheat code for the medical system.
It's kind of understandable from their perspective, because if what they went through, they're like, oh, it could have been so much easier if I just did this and this and this. And they probably feel like, well, if you only do this and this and this, then you'll get an easier road. You'll get your treatment faster. Because I didn't get my treatment as fast as I would. But then again, it's like, well, how do you know? Because you're not a therapist. You're just someone who has gender dysphoria. You don't know how serious their case is and all this stuff. Like, you might be misdiagnosing someone because you're not a doctor.
They even say at one point, you could be confusing these other feelings with gender dysphoria. So, well, how do we figure that out? If we don't say, hey, I have gender dysphoria, but I also have these other problems.
Or how is
what's what?
How is your therapist supposed to help you sort it out if you're being coached into getting this thing that you want, even though you don't quite feel that way?
Not a good setup. Like, I understand their heart's in the right place.
Yeah, that's what I would have said.
But yeah, even informed consent as a model has serious flaws. Because essentially, informed consent is a sheet of paper you sign to say, I know the risks. Spoiler alert, they don't tell you all the risks. They give you a very, very short description of something, but they don't go very deep. It's a very loose process.
I mean, they don't.
It's like signing up for the army. Like, what's the worst that could happen?
Russia.
Oh, God.
But yeah, I mean, like, they don't take their patients and sit them down in front of a projector and play like an old, like, so Timmy wants to be Tammy. Let's talk about what's going to happen. Like, yeah, Kav's right. It's just a kind of a piece of paper.
And they skip over a lot. I've heard from people who had transition who tell you, they just hand you a piece of paper and tell you to sign the dotted line. It's not treated with the kind of weight it should. Because basically it's just legal protection for the doctor. You can't sue us if things go wrong. Here's a piece of paper.
And
Jesus Christ.
God.
There's that
literally
one.
What it is. It's passing the buck on research, saying we're not gonna.
So cynical.
We don't have to take any liability. You accept the liability, and you get to bypass all the gatekeeping.
And there's that one gender surgeon in California that has like 14, 15, 16 malpractice suits running against him like at this moment, but probably none of those are going to go through because they all signed that consent form.
Yeah, once you sign the form, man.
Yeah.
I couldn't even get my wisdom teeth removed without my dentist staring me in the eye and being like, Yeah, this is just it's even though this is just a surgery we do like all the time, there's still a chance that things could go wrong. So we want to be sure that you know that there's still going to be risks, even when you're doing just a routine surgery. I
And then
can't
how
imagine just
well, and then how surprised were you when you woke up with breasts and a vagina?
I woke up miserable. I think that's the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Possibly.
Because it's important, because it will make you feel better, because it will make your transition happier and healthier, not just because it might influence whether you ultimately choose to transition. There's a wide spectrum of how happy trans people are in the trans community. You'll see some people who pass perfectly great and they say, great, my transition's done, I feel happy, I feel awesome, I love all the medical procedures I've had, and I'm just so happy I was able to transition. And then you'll see other people who, you know, are still happy they transitioned, of course, but who are like posting in, say top surgery forums and are like, does my left nipple look half a millimeter too big? And this person is like bearded, is so passing, like they're just covered in hair, and they're like, I don't know, I think my chest looks female. And like no one can see anything female about it, but they still clearly are sort of entangled in these dysphoric feelings that like still have a very complex relationship with their body. People want to have happy
dysmorphia.
transitions, and trans people have different like levels of happiness with the transition. So I would argue that working on yourself, working on your mental health, working on your relationship with sexism, with homophobia, with trauma, all those things might make you just a happier trans person. It won't like cure the gender dysphoria out of you. Working on your eating disorder, you're still trans by the end of it, you still want to go on testosterone, you still want top surgery, you haven't beaten the gender nonconformity out of you, but when you go on testosterone, you're not freaking out about the weight gain that you have when you grow some muscle. You're more comfortable in your body. Your dysphoria is lower. It hasn't changed the fact that you want to transition. You still want to transition, but it has made you feel more comfortable in your body. In my own case, I have OCD, and working on my OCD with my therapist has made my dysphoria less. OCD makes me, in part, feel hyper-aware of my body, and so the fact that I already have some sort of pre-existing dysphoria, it amplifies it, right? Like, I'm thinking a lot about the parts of my body that don't look exactly how I like them to look. And then when my OCD is better, I'm not thinking as much about it. I'm still dysphoric, and I still I'm still on testosterone, I'm still happily socially transitioned, all those things, but I'm better, and I'm happier. And so I think that when people talk about reducing dysphoria through non-transitional methods, they're often not coming at it from good faith. They're often hoping that you'll like turn out this perfectly conforming person. But no, from a
I think that's actually kind of bad faith to assume that people who suggest therapy instead of transitioning are bad faith.
Yeah.
There's this idea that you just want them to be gender conforming, and I don't see any evidence of in any of the people who want more aggressive investigation of alternate means want to turn people into like typical masculine, feminine. Actually, a lot of them say you should be allowed to be those things. You should be able to be whatever gender expression you want without the added misperception of self. Like surgery, or surgery is probably the main thing. You just accept your status as it is.
Yeah.
Nonconformity.
It's sort of like the bone that the non-binaries pick against the world, where they're like, well, if you're not perfectly a boy that plays with trucks and wears blue and, likes football, you're not considered a boy, or, that kind of stuff. Like, it hasn't been that way for a long time in the culture, that people are looking for perfectly feminine women or perfectly masculine men. Like, I thought it's pretty accepted widely that there's a range of how women can be and a range of how men can be.
Yeah, but don't you think this whole trans stuff might be actually making that have a comeback? Like, if you're a guy, if you're a boy and you like dolls, and you're like, oh well, I got news for you. Turns
Yeah,
out you're
I mean,
trans. Do you
I
not think that's a possibility?
with the non-binary, which, like I said, I think that that's a totally different from what this person's talking about. But with
Well, like
the
with androgynous kids going to a therapist because of whatever.
Yeah.
Because they're sad or depressed,
Right.
anxiety filled.
Yeah, I
mean,
think
it could happen.
I mean, I think with the ideology around it, that there are more conservative, traditional style gender roles being enforced.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm being.
Yeah,
It's sort of the comeback of the binary.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
Ironically.
subtly ironic.
Except in a different way, to bring the binary back to break it again, but in the way that they want it broken.
It's sort of the weird snake eating its own tail cycle of binary breaking and then binary building.
Yeah.
Not very clear what any of this is supposed to lead to. In some sense, I would see trans people as very gender conforming.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
They have gendered traits that they see about themselves, and they say, wait, my gendered traits don't match my sex. Therefore, I want to fit the category. I want to fit into the category that does fit it. I want to conform myself to the proper category that I belong to. Seems very gender conformist.
Yeah, I mean,
It'd be more non-conforming. It'd be like, I like a lot of girly stuff. I'm kind of feminine in whatever quality, but I'm also a dude.
Yeah.
A good faith standpoint, working on this stuff might reduce your dysphoria. And maybe this will end up with you being like, oh my god, I don't identify as transgender. But probably not, but maybe. And in that case, that's cool. You'll learn that. And in the case that, say you learn that in the middle of your transition, well, I mean, that's really valuable information. And you have seriously improved your life, right? So in this case of these people who had serious depression, were really suicidal, they worked on their mental health, and they no longer felt the need to identify as transgender. I mean, great. They fixed their depression. That's awesome. So, sort of no matter what the outcome is, if you're working on happy and healthy things, life gets better.
It really, I understand and I somewhat agree with pretty much this whole video so far. I mean, we've picked apart the parts that we don't really agree with, or I don't really agree with. But just this whole kind of, I don't know, I feel like when they're talking about going through the transition, they're really hiding the long-term medical effects of it.
It's very flippant, I think. But it's not quite the seriousness that it should be treated with.
But that could be because, I mean, we talked earlier about how the studies just aren't well funded or don't have great methodologies. And there's just not a lot of studies out there of the long-term effects. I mean, we can see them.
Yeah.
We
this
know.
person says they've read a lot of detrans narratives, but from what I've read, there's a lot of talk about the complications that people have suffered from. Yesterday, I saw a tweet from someone who transitioned, started taking testosterone. She was female, and basically eventually had to stop taking it because it started killing her liver and kidneys. And then her uterus, died. So she had to get a hysterectomy. And then she's like, yeah, you got to do pelvic exercises because there's a giant cavity there. You have to build up muscle. It totally ruined this person's life. And it was just from testosterone. Wasn't even other elective surgery. So
I mean, there was one I read that was a trans woman that detransitioned and went back to being a male. And even after that, because of the amount of estrogen that they were taking, they had a blood clot in their leg. And their leg ended up dying, and they had to get their leg amputated. I mean, there's just all kinds of unforeseen medical complications from this kind of treatment. And yeah, you're right. It's kind of very flippantly talked
you
about.
You learned from it. That's great. Some people can take testosterone or estrogen cross-sex and come out of it fine without any major complications. Some people do have complications, and it can really mess them up. It's not something you just get over. Some people can actually kill their ability to produce their natural hormone. And then you have to be on hormones the rest of your life.
I mean, there was Gavin, I think was his name, was the one that was interviewed on 2020. And then also, I know we mentioned Benjamin Boyce like 80,000 fucking times, but yes. Also Benjamin Boyce interviewed him. But he had the orchiectomy, which is the removal of the testicles. So obviously he's going to need to be on hormone. I mean, he clearly lost the ability to produce his own testosterone for the rest of his life.
And pee.
Yes, because pee comes from the balls. Yeah.
And I think when people say go to a therapist, and I felt this too, it's sort of like what does that mean? I mean, come on. So some of you might have never been to a therapist or might have not had a good relationship with a therapist. A therapist is really excellent. It's not just like a cop-out suggestion, it's a real suggestion. So what's so great about a therapist is that like some of these thoughts are really hard to parse out. So let's say I have dysphoria around my hips, right? I don't have an eating disorder personally, but like hypothetically, let's say I did. The thoughts won't ever be as clean cut as, oh my god, I hate my hips because my brain is male and, you know, I am a male but in a female body and that's why I hate them. Or I hate my hips because I have an eating disorder and my hips make me look fat and that's why I hate them. It won't be that clear. It will be this muddled feeling, it will be just an emotion, and you really can't parse out what's going on, what combination of these things.
Pause.
But a therapist who's trained...
I just wanted out. Where's your credentials to say this? It might be but for a lot of people, it might be simple. It might be complex. I don't like it. I don't know why, but I don't like what he was saying.
Yeah, he's very much trying to generalize a very complex thing.
Mm-hmm.
So to be fair, if you are the kind of person who experiences high emotional negativity, let's be a little sexist here.
Probably a woman.
You know, this is a biological woman, probably experiences emotions at an extreme level, more than typical guys. So it could be that it does experience a lot of negative thoughts in a very amorphous way.
Are you saying guys see emotions differently? That's bull. Take a salt tablet and walk it off. Wait, bottle it up. Don't let those emotions out. What are you,
Ew.
stupid?
Emotions? Gross.
What are emotions?
They're the
I
things
remember
that
having
women
them
have.
as a 13-year-old.
Yeah. We have them every month.
Oh, is that what yelling is? I thought that was just you producing jelly.
Oh.
Well, I can go. That's disgusting.
What are you, a female stand-up comic? You're going to start talking about periods?
So
No,
I was
I'm
talking
gonna
about
talk
periods
my
the other day.
vagina.
Yeah, so... like that one Simpsons bit with the female stand-up comic. Yeah.
Is
Oh,
it absurdly safe?
in these things, who's listening to you, who is cool with trans people, but is not, like, you know, who's just a neutral observer, right? Can listen to this and have a better sense as to what's going on and offer some real suggestions. And all the time my therapist will say these things, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe, like, you know more about me than, like, I know about myself. And it's incredible. You can make a lot of progress as a therapist.
Okay, that's fair.
yeah.
Yep.
She's literally just saying, go to a therapist.
You have complex feelings, go to a therapist. I think that's...
You get a big thumbs up.
I've never felt the need to seek the services of a therapist, but have any of you guys ever used a therapist?
Yeah, I
To
have.
go to a psychiatrist.
Yeah. What's the experience like? I don't even know what the experience is like. Just in general, you don't have to talk about it in detail.
Therapist.
Yeah, it does.
No, in between making out with them.
Yeah.
I got
Oh.
one therapist who was a lady in training, and it turned out that therapist wasn't in my basically my insurance. They had said my insurance was paying for it, but it turned out it wasn't, and so I was home. I don't know if I'm still on the hook for like several grand worth of therapy. And the other therapist that I went to,
God.
it kind of helped me a lot with understanding that I just needed to talk to people more, and I didn't have a lot of problems with me. I had very bad self-image. There's just so that did help a lot.
See, I'm perfect, so I've never needed
Gabbols,
that, you know.
which therapist convinced you to put on a dress?
That was all
The
me.
therapist
Oh, that was you.
convinced him not to.
Probably. It's like, Jesus Christ. What are you doing?
Would you stop, Gabbols? Would you stop wearing a dress every time you show up? That's absurd.
That skirt is so short. I can see your belly button.
Through the skirt? So
Yeah, if you pull it up long enough, you know.
it's a belt.
Gabbols, you know it's inappropriate to show up to therapy naked.
Gabbols, you need your skin on. Oh, I mean, that's pretty based.
Okay, but there are still things I think you can do even if you're not in the place to see a therapist. So a big one is thinking about the media, TV, movies, and books that you're exposing yourself to. A lot of detransitioners talk about, and I guess specifically the female to male to female detransitioners, that they wish they'd seen more butch women portrayed in a positive light. I think you should spend some time looking at butch women portrayed in a positive light. Even if you end up being the most binary trans male ever, it's really valuable to...
Let's list some butch women portrayed in a positive light. Kav.
Kav, what are you talking about? Toxic.
Butch icon, me.
Kav, are you wearing a pretty dress right now?
No.
Therefore,
Butch.
Wearing a t-shirt.
Butch.
Cat.
Super butch.
What's it of your favorite truck?
What size Doc Martens do you wear?
I don't even know what that is.
How many piercings do you have in each ear?
Just the one.
Damn it.
Not that butch. I'm kind of tomboyish.
Oh?
Oh, careful. You're going to get lots of male suitors saying that.
Yeah, I know.
Oh no, the Simps. You hear that? I hear their wave coming.
It's the tomboy mating call.
The thirst is coming.
The thirst.
to work on these feelings of like internalized homophobia that I think almost all of us have. What would I recommend? I loved reading this. It's this magazine that you can find online. I think I had to pay for it, but it's just beautiful. It's called Butch is Not a Dirty Word, and it has these photographs and like life stories of a lot of butch people. This includes butch people who are confident in their womanhood, transgender women who are butches, non-binary people who are butches, all sorts of butch people displaying masculinity. Again, I don't, at the end of the day, identify as a butch person, but I thought it was really cool to kind of connect with my like broader community of people who are assigned female but are now very masculine. And I think it's important because a lot of us who are trans men or trans masculine people, one of the first steps in our transition, we're going to be read as lesbians. I mean, that's like, everyone's been through that, right? And it's a lot easier to get through this stage if you're cool with lesbians.
Is the person on screen?
Trans man.
Did I miss something?
Yeah, trans man.
He's saying that in order
Froze
to get
their
more
eggs.
comfortable being a trans man, it started by getting used to like butch lesbians.
Well, I think it's more like
well, that
you're gonna
explains a
be-
couple of things, yeah.
Yeah, like you're going to be identified as a butch lesbian if you transition into a man, because you probably look female, still looks possibly female. I mean, almost passing, but still kind of butch lesbian looking.
No,
The
he looks
voice-
like a guy.
He passes quite well.
Yeah, definitely.
I wonder what this
I
magazine is.
identified- I could tell. In fact, when I first watched this, I thought maybe this was a D-trans woman.
Yeah, that's
I
what
just-
I thought too.
Thought he had lovely
So someone-
eyes.
Yeah, I thought it was someone who had been on testosterone, and then they dropped their voice, and so the voice is distinctly male. The face is kind of lesbian. Oh, and the
Face
haircut,
is kind of lesbian.
the haircut plus face, I should say, because the haircut
Yeah,
is kind
no,
of
I
Face
get
of a
that.
lesbian.
it is. And that's, I think, probably the reality a lot of trans men deal with, is when they first transition, people just think they're lesbian. Because they look female, and they have, like, a butch haircut. Must be a lesbian.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I see it now, probably. Maybe, I don't know. Well, Cav, would you?
No.
Would you, Gabbols?
Yeah, probably.
You're bi.
Disgusting.
Doesn't count.
It really doesn't.
You're only half gay. That doesn't even count. This is like right in your wheelhouse.
So, yeah, it's just like his eyes. It's fine.
Zera, you're full on homo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good man. Good man.
I am not.
Finally.
Yeah, it's not the filthy fence sitter, but full on.
Okay, so the full homos, would you?
Date, yes. Sex, probably not.
Yeah, I don't like the small Twinkie types.
Wow. Jeez. Hold off with the personal attacks, would you?
Shut up, twink.
Fuck
I'm
you.
against anything other than I don't know. I'm okay with anything other than basically just straight women, pretty much.
Based.
Yeah, whore.
So what do I mean by that? Obviously, I get that when you want to pass as male, it sucks when people are reading you as female. But I'll see in trans spaces people talk about someone reading them as a lesbian in a way that is clearly clouded by like lesbophobia. People will comment on like people who are asking if they're passing and being like, that looks too lesbian, or ugly lesbian, or only lesbians wear those nose rings. Like just stuff that's like, You know it when you see it. You're like,
Well,
that
that's
is people
accurate.
who are bi.
I know it is kind of, I mean, there's, you know,
I mean, only lesbians wear 3 earrings in each ear, unless you're lying. In which case, you're still
pass
probably
as
a
a
lesbian.
straight man.
I don't know if my claps are going to translate, but stereotypes exist for a reason.
They do.
Yeah. Oh dear.
I mean, we'd all like to confuse ourselves with saying that lipstick lesbians are a thing, but it's not. Come on, it's a myth. Just like the female orgasm.
I've never gotten a female to orgasm, so I'm pretty sure it's a myth.
Yeah. Personally, yeah, I've never have either.
Neither have I. Well, confirmed.
Oh god.
Democracy. Oh god.
Those people are biased against lesbians. I would also recommend reading things that portray trans people, gender nonconforming people, non-binary people in a positive light, in a neutral light. It can be a huge deal. So I have this giant collection of trans books that I'm going to be talking about, and again, they feature trans people. They also do feature people who identify.
Are trans books about trans subject, or are they objects that have now become books?
They've transitioned to becoming books.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to clarify that.
See, they're
Not as-
basically, those transformers that sometimes transform into objects. It's like
Right.
that, but it's a book.
I had the cassette tape one. That was fucking awesome.
I had a video camera one. It was
Oh,
Rem-
envious.
God.
Although I'm a gay man, I could live out my childhood all I want. I'm going any day right now.
Wait,
You're in
Get those
Disney
Disney
is
tickets.
suspiciously
I could go to
wealthy.
Disneyland.
No, don't go to Disneyland. Disneyland's gone downhill.
Disney World.
I got
It's also- it's
$6,000
not
to
even worse
blow on a
downhill.
Star Wars hotel.
Has it? Oh.
as trans, but who experience gender differently than the average person. I think that normalizing your own gender nonconformity can be a huge part to accepting who you are. I also recommend looking into whatever you're passionate about. Find people who are gender nonconforming or trans who are into that as well. So a big deal for me was finding that there's a scientist whose name was Ben Bars, who is a trans man. It was really cool reading his writings of his transition and also his time in academia, because I'm also someone who's in academia and who's a trans man, and it was cool to see that there had been someone like me before. I also love, as stupid as it's going to sound, I watched this show called Are You the One?, which is a dating show, and it was the first time they had a transmasculine person on the show. It was the first time I had seen a transmasculine person portrayed as sexually desirable ever. And I mean, he was a total wreck. His sexual desirability was kind of complex, got him into a lot of drama, but it was such an emotional experience, seeing someone like me in that light. So actively search out the kinds of media and books and representation that shows you to a broad range of people. I actively look for
Watching
still not just
reality
trans men, but
shows.
also non-binary.
Watching reality shows, another feminine trait.
Yeah, but that's also a gay trait as well. No, that's a gay trait.
Oh, that's a gay
Yeah.
Look, hey, come on now.
It's a stereotype for a reason.
Stop. I don't want to be a stereotype.
I'm sorry, but you're almost as big as a
What's
stereotype as
your
me and
current-
Gabbols.
Your
Oh,
current
no.
reality show.
I don't want to talk about it.
No, I want to know now.
No,
Is it embarrassing?
it's
Bachelorette?
embarrassing.
Oh, okay.
How many seasons of The Bachelorette have you seen?
No, I'm not talking about
Is
that.
it not that embarrassing?
Stop.
Is it Eurovision?
It's I have watched Eurovision. I do enjoy Eurovision. Eurovision is very good.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah, Eurovision is pretty awesome.
Because
Okay.
I know that I definitely have a lot of
Well, go ahead, Gabs.
Transmasculine, transfeminine. What? What's that?
So transmasculine and transfeminine is a sort of subcategory where they want to be masculine or they want feminine traits, but they don't fully identify as a man or a woman. It's sort of a non-binary category. Usually it's non-binary person that trends towards one or the other.
Like the one on Dr. Phil that talked to what's his face.
Yeah, that'd be like a transmasculine.
Yeah.
That was
Well, I think
really
one was a
what
trans
they
man,
were
but the
doing.
other
Yeah.
one was out there with their
Yeah.
gender.
I think the one person fully non-binary, but usually it's a transitional space between becoming fully trans. People will be cis, then become non-binary, and then they'll be transmasculine, and then they become. It's like an intermediate state.
It's the
Like
David
gray.
Bowie syndrome.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm all for that, though.
I know, I do
all,
love Bowie.
All women should become
Who doesn't?
So should all men. Everyone should become David Bowie.
Yeah.
David Bowie should be like Horatio in that endless space.
It's terrible.
I mean, that's entirely fair.
That is fair.
Incredibly successful singer. It's a wonderful man.
But if everybody's Bowie, nobody's Bowie.
That's true.
True conundrum.
Is that how that works?
It sounds good. It doesn't need to work, but it sounds good.
The
And that's all
supply
we're
and
going
demand theory of Bowie.
Biases against non-binary people, because came to my awareness as a trans person in, I don't know, 2014 or something was when I first started to think I was transgender, and the attitudes around non-binary people then were not great. I think my earliest trans consciousness was coded in these media that treated non-binary people quite negatively. If I were to ever identify as non-binary, I just want to make sure that I'm not so biased into believing that I must be a binary trans man that I'm neglecting that possibility, because I all the time I see people who end up identifying as non-binary that just never consider that as a possibility for themselves. So you never know the way your biases might land. You might have it go the other way, right? Where like people are so transphobic in your area that you think it's most likely that you'll identify as a butch lesbian, but then
Transphobe singles in your area.
I wonder, are they based or are they cringe?
Oh yeah, that's a good
Because they
distinction
might
to
be
make.
TERFs, and I don't want to date a rad fib.
Oof.
Don't date rad femmes.
Is that really an issue for you?
I mean, TERFs are basically just XY get out re.
There could be male feminists that are gay.
Most male
no, they're
feminists are
not.
just
Aren't they usually
predators.
just identifying
Yeah.
as sexual predators?
Yes.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're sneaky fuckers.
They hang out at rallies, and
God, if you find that Stone Toss comic,
Yeah.
just throw that up, please.
it's the most accurate stone toss.
Why would you speak so ill of Vosh?
Oh.
and exposing yourselves
Allegedly.
to positive trans media, it flips and you realize, oh my god, no, I actually do identify as a trans man. So I think just see positive portrayals of people all across this sort of gender spectrum, and it will help your transition, it will help you know what you want. I would also make sure that you have some passions that are not related to transition. Some detransitioners who regret their transition
Probably the best advice.
Yeah.
Good.
Also, the fact that this
Crazy.
needs to be advice makes me sad.
Like y'all, you can stop reading for 2 minutes about trans issues. Go outside.
Touch grass.
Touch grass. Read a book.
Actually touch grass. Do something.
There's like they talk about the transition being this thing that they're getting a lot of like I'll just use their word euphoria from, but like a rush from continuing to transition, and then when they're nearing the completion for the next completion point, then they kind of hit that lull and they're like, well, I'm looking for that next big thing. Then they might be looking into surgery, and when they get the surgery, then they hit that lull. And they're like, well, I need the next big thing. And then they'll get more surgery, and then they'll hit that lull. So I don't know. That is really healthy advice to not focus on your transition, because I think that a lot of people who do end up detransitioning do view their transition in that way.
Yeah, it's like a lot of time and energy that gets sunk in for it to end up not being a legitimate part of your life.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you are like legitimately transgender, like worrying about it constantly, like can't be good for you. It's like doing anything else and just having the transitioning be a medical thing would be much better.
It's like being gay. Do you walk around all day going, I'm gay. Hey, how you doing? I'm gay. Boy, that guy, I would fuck him because I'm gay.
Although
Well,
I know
Zera.
I do. Wait.
Yeah.
Oh.
talk about the time they were transitioning as being very isolated, that they spent it holed up in their room, having dropped out of school, not working a job, just smoking weed, not talking with people, and it makes sense you'd regret that time in your life. On the other hand, if you're not sure about your transition,
Watching anime.
but you make sure that you're
Shit.
Oh no!
The detrans people I talk to, they hole up in their room, they drop out of school, they don't have a job, but then being on Tumblr, talking to people who are crazy.
Well, now it's Twitter, so it is different.
Now you're on Twitter.
It's a different URL.
No, it's vastly more toxic.
With 20% more toxicity.
Yeah, you're not talking to anyone normal.
I'm talking to a bunch
You're-
of TAIs.
Bunch of bots.
Less based TAIs.
All the Russian bots trying to make you gay and trans.
Yeah. And be like, hey, did you guys see Ukraine's pretty much Russian, right?
I want to
Transition.
die now.
Well, isn't the problem there? They're just going to make all of the Western uniforms just fucking fab.
True.
Their uniforms are going to be shit.
It's true.
So put all of them in the closet or disappeared them.
Were the Nazis gay? They had
Yes.
fantastic uniforms.
Yes.
We're,
Hugo
Finally
is at least
gay.
gay.
well, there were certain people who ended up
Yes.
killed off later, but they were gay at first.
Enrolled in university, studying something you love, that you're working a job you're excited about, that you're making art, that you're playing music, that you're coding, whatever it is that inspires you, that you're doing something that isn't just transition, then it's more likely that your reflection on your time spent transitioning, whether it's because you're an old wise trans person or because you end up detransitioning, that you'll have a positive outlook on that time if you spent it doing something you're passionate about. It also sets you up well because I will see people in the trans community who talk about, I'm done with my transition, now what? I spent my whole life sort of like planning for top surgery and I just had top surgery. And that's great, I don't feel dysphoria, but I just don't know what comes next. If you make sure that you have passions throughout your transition, you can have a smoother path into normal life after you're done with your transition. The last thing I'm going to talk about is a bit controversial, but I hope it might be useful for you. So when people talk about social influences on dysphoria, they are often not coming at it from good faith. The literature on rapid onset gender dysphoria is hogwash, it's terrible, don't read it, but I do think that it is a real thing.
Is that true, Kav? Is it hogwash? Is it terrible?
I have heard it is the initial study.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
had
I've heard that
methodology problem.
that seems to be a common thread.
I don't think we've had another good study on it, though. Like a legitimate study. It's obviously this thing, and we definitely have anecdotes.
Yeah. I think they're still trying. Well, they seem to still be trying to formulate a theory to test around it.
Yeah. Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And you should think about what community you're in and how people are making you feel about your body and the language they're using around your body. Again, not from the sake of that you wouldn't identify as trans if you were in a different community, you would, but from the sake of, like, you might be a happier trans person if you're surrounding yourself with good people. So let's say specifically, there's been a lot of discourse these days recently about transmedicalism and how that ideology really promotes a self-hatred talk. And I think that's real. I see that trans spaces, right? People being like, you're not really trans unless you shower in the dark. You might have not showered in the dark, but now be tempted to shower in the dark because you heard you aren't, like, valid unless you've done that. And I'll see people...
Don't shower in the dark, guys.
You're not trans if you don't shower while brushing your teeth.
I always brush my teeth while I shower. Do you guys do that?
What the fuck is
What?
wrong with you?
You guys don't brush your teeth when you shower?
No.
What? It saves time.
It's such a
What?
heterosexual thing to do. I'm sorry.
Is that a heterosexual thing to do? Next thing you guys are going to tell me you don't poop while in the shower to save time.
What?
Yeah. It's all
At least
pipe.
you're-
It's all
at least
pipe
you're
theory.
At least you're shit posting.
I was gonna say you should shower in the dark because looking at yourself is a sin.
That's
It is true.
correct.
You
Oh.
are
It's sinful.
with the same body of same sex.
That's why touching yourself is also a sin.
It's correct. If you're getting naked, you should put on oven mitts first and then take your clothes off so your hands are coming in direct contact with your body.
Now I am actually getting kind of curious how it would be to shower in the dark, because that sounds like
I know, yeah. It sounds kind of
weird,
cool,
Sounds
right?
like
romantic,
I'll try to do
actually.
it.
Die.
I feel like I'd stub my toe. And that would
try
hurt.
it.
Candlelit
At
shower.
least once.
For our next shower, we're gonna shower in the dark and report back.
We
Well,
are.
I
We
do.
should
I
do
think
it
I mentioned
together.
it. I think I mentioned it in another show, but I do want to go to that restaurant where you eat in the pitch black.
Oh, that sounds so cool.
I know, isn't it? Right? I want to do it.
Wow.
Anyway.
Reddit who use really strong language. So I will see people make memes about, like, wanting to get breast cancer so that they can have top surgery. It's not how breast cancer
Jesus.
works. You don't want cancer.
Oof.
Or I will see people use language around their hips and places where they're female coded where fat is that is just, like, really bad. And they'll introduce this to other people who might have not seen that language before. So these are people who are trans, who are dysphoric, who will almost certainly have a really happy, successful transition, but who might be less happy having had all this new language to talk negatively about their body. So, you should reflect on, like, are you happier in the spaces that you're in? Are you happier in the communities you're in? Like, is that working out for you? So, I mean, in my case, like, I just don't follow the communities on Reddit that I think promote this negative self-talk. I'm not on trans Twitter, which I view as, like, I just personally, it doesn't make me feel better being on trans Twitter. And I follow people on YouTube who, like, make me feel happy. I don't follow the trans medical people. And the people that the trans individuals who I talk with one-on-one, we have, like, very healthy, mature relationships. So I talk with one person, he's also a PhD student, so I talk with him about his research. I talk with another person, she's trying to get a full-time job in finance, and I talk with her about that, and about her friends, and her desire to date. And I talk with another person about, like, writing and, like, sort of creative writing about trans bodies. I find that from those interactions, I walk away feeling better about myself, more clear in my role as a trans person, and I don't get sucked into this sort of toxic language around self-hatred. And this comes up in detrans spaces as well. So I would not recommend you look at detrans spaces, not just because I think detransitioners deserve their own space, but also because it introduces new language to talk about your body. So I will see some detransitioners when I was...
Do you agree with that? I don't agree with any of this. Well, I agree with some of it, but like the not looking at...
I understand both sides here. I understand, like, don't look at trans Twitter, because obviously...
Yeah, trans Twitter needs to burn.
I think there's more utility in looking at a resource that provides pushback to your opinion. If you're thinking about doing something, it might be worth it to look at the side against it, because what do people on the other side have to say?
And that's why I became a devout Muslim before I,
in these spaces, which again I do largely regret, but who want a community, understandably, and who don't regret their transition, but they get introduced to this world on Twitter where people are describing top surgery as mutilation, where people are like, of course you regretted it, talking about the trans ideology. And these people are like, no, I don't feel that. But then once you see it over and over again, you're like, I guess I did mutilate myself, even if you never felt that in the first place. And I really hate that I got some of that language in my brain, right? It's like, as I said, mutilation. I'm going to try to not name a bunch of these things because I don't want to get into your brain as well. But yeah, the words and the communities that use them really do have an impact on your dysphoria. And so you should just be thoughtful about who you're talking with and how they make you feel. So as a closing note, I have to mention, of course, that the reason we're talking about detransition so much these days is because of transphobia. Unfortunately, many detransitioners, though definitely not all, probably not the majority even, but some detransitioners and a vocal few support transphobic policies. So most notably, we have Keira Bell in the UK who's suing the NHS. I get why this is really frustrating for trans people, and I get why this makes us want to push them out of our community. It's horrible when they back transphobic policies, but I want to offer...
Is that a transphobic policy, what Keira Bell was pushing for with the Tavistock Center?
I genuinely don't know. I have to read it again.
So Keira Bell, for those who don't know, was a girl who went to the Tavistock Center and received hormone blockers at a very young age.
Under 16.
Under 16. So received puberty blockers. After going through the puberty blockers, went on hormones.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm pretty sure had a mastectomy, correct?
Possibly. And then after they detransitioned, they sued the Tavistock Center for giving them blockers so young and all the health consequences that came with it. And initially the court sided with her, and they said minors under 16 cannot reasonably consent to puberty blockers. I think that case has gotten more complicated now. I think they may have reversed it.
Yeah, I think it's back in courts again.
I wouldn't say it's transphobic at all, because the question isn't whether trans people exist. The question is whether it's ethical to give people under 16 life-altering medication. A lot of the discourse is, oh, puberty blockers are reversible, which is just patently not true. You lose out on that time period of puberty. Even if you have it later, you don't get those years back. You don't get that development back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get a different kind of development that's not as extensive as it would have been through natural puberty.
At least sort of a plea for empathy. Put yourself in their shoes, truly. Just think about it for 1 second. Imagine what it's like to have suffered gender dysphoria very severely for a very long time and have been told by everyone that transition would work, it would make you feel better, and it would be great. And then it didn't work for you. Imagine how hard that would feel, and how embarrassing and sad. And imagine how tempted you would be to assume that's the case for everyone. I think everyone wants to assume that their life experience is the universal one. It's like a common human flaw. It's in part why I think trans people are so suspicious of detransitioners, because our transition worked great, so why do these other people not have their transition work great? And so, they're no different than us. They want to believe that every person will regret their transition. I mean, that's not the case, but I'm sympathetic to why some of those people would feel that. And over time, people's views change. I've watched...
I don't think it's accurate to say that detrans people say that everyone must regret their transition. I don't think that's...
I haven't seen that in detransition
spaces. Their argument is a lot more people are transitioning, therefore there may be a lot more trans regret, because there are so few checkpoints now that the possibility of regret is much higher.
Yeah, that's what I...
True too. Because of... Remember the ADHD and the ADD and autism, all of these things were novel for therapists to prescribe their patients because they're more noticeable. So I just assume that obviously they'd prescribe them more because they're more preoccupied with these diagnoses. It's more in their mind, so they're more inclined to diagnose them.
Transitioners go evolutions, right? Where they, at first they feel, oh my god, everyone must regret their transition like I do. And then they realize that's not the case, and maybe they even have more nuanced views about their own gender. And I think expecting someone to have something not turn out well for them and immediately be supportive of trans people and immediately be super pro-transition, it's just a really hard position. So I think you gotta give people space. But then also, when we say things like detransition never happens, it's very rare, most of those accounts are fake accounts, those people are lying, they never transitioned, or detrans people are cisgender trans trenders, they were never trans to begin with, why do these cisgender people speak about trans issues? When you say those things, it pushes detrans people away. It pushes those marginal people who wanted a community, who feel really complex feelings about their gender, about their body, who need still someone to talk to. It pushes them right into the hands of gender critical people who are really ready to provide that affirmation that people need. And so, I see it all the time. I saw it on Twitter. There's one detransitioner named Kai Shevers who now identifies as transmasculine, but uses she, her pronouns, I believe. So she talks about how seductive it is as someone when you're having doubts about your transition to fall into this sort of ideology. When we dismiss people who are having doubts about their transition, who are detransitioning, tell them that they are just cisgender people, we're just confused. When we dismiss them, we push them right into the claws of gender critical people and right into that ideology. I think it's really important for us to be empathetic, for us to be understanding about the fact that some of these people might have complex feelings about their transition, complex feelings about transition in general, and to be open to speaking with them and to listen, to give them their space, to not talk over them, and to not say things like, I'm cool with detrans people except when they do X. I mean, because that language, when people say, I'm cool with trans people except when they're so showy, I'm cool with gay people except when they make it their whole identity. I'm cool.
True.
I'm cool with gay people unless they're massive.
Oh, cut that. Gonna have to bleep that. Oh, Jesus.
I'm gonna push
Susan. Oh, my God.
I'm sorry, was I not supposed to say that?
I'm sorry, was I not supposed to tell the truth?
Oh, Jesus.
I think this person on this point is half right.
No.
I think the assumption seems, what I'm getting out of this, is that detrans people are good if they come out of their transition still saying that trans identity is valid. They still have to believe in it. It's kind of like saying, well, even if you leave the church, as long as you say Christianity is true, you're okay. It's sort of a disconnect. This idea, this concept of self-ID, of being able to know your own gender, or that your gender has to live out in some way in the material world, this whole setup didn't work for this person. And so they are understandably confused, why didn't it work for me? Maybe it's because this whole thing is some sort of fraud. Maybe what people are really experiencing is something totally different. So they start talking to other people who had similar experiences. And they're like, well, okay, what similarities do we have? oh, suicidally depressed, and oh, I had sexual abuse, or I had these mental illnesses. And they start to see these dots and they say, so of course they're going to develop some other understanding. I don't accept this narrative that in order to be good detrans, they have to still accept it.
Yeah. I wonder what his conception of gender critical is, because I think that's a pretty flowy.
Now there are problems in let's be honest.
Right.
Gender critical has issues.
What is gender critical? Because I always thought gender critical was like the non-binary folks.
Oh, no. So gender critical is usually gender critical feminists.
Yeah, it's a feminist.
Oh,
it's
like the actual TERFs?
Yes. So the people they call TERFs, usually the people they're talking about are gender critical feminists. So they essentially say gender is fake. This whole concept of masculine and feminine is fake. It's just the patriarchy defining things for us.
It's because up until the patriarchy thing, I'm sure they would agree.
Yeah, like, I have mixed feelings on it for that reason. Because, like, I don't believe in the patriarchy, but their conception is that masculine and feminine is a fake construct, and we should just get rid of them. We should just live as we are. Biological sex is there. It's just a thing. We don't need to put societal importance on it. You can just live whatever life you want. That's gender critical. Where they get crazy is the feminist part.
Right.
As feminists do, they get very, very anti-male to a toxic degree. Things just get, and they get very infighty about, like, oh, if you're a woman and you wear a dress, you're just falling for the patriarchy. It's kind of the opposite.
Scum manifesto.
For the matriarchy.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, you're not allowed to have gendered expression, otherwise you're brainwashed. It's just
that's where the X comes from.
That's the radical feminist movement. Just, they're not very happy people. Now, some of the detrans people I know have said that, yeah, you come out of transition and then you end up in these sort of very radical feminist circles, or you end up in these other sort of social justice warrior type people. You're just doing the same thing with a different flavor.
Right. That's weird, because usually feminists are the most happy people I've ever met in my life.
Oh, yeah.
Stop lying.
Look, it's a true thing, right? If you're in a cult, you're likely to end up in another cult. If you're in one ideology, you're likely to end up in another ideology.
Well, I'm glad I found a cult that is really nice, Kav. Thanks for being our cult leader.
Yes, you're welcome. If you have really strong feelings and, like, opinions, and you're just really easily swept up by group frenzy, like, you're just gonna get carried in different directions by really strong groups. And it can take a while for you to kind of find yourself and say, okay, I gotta, like, mellow out, maybe not put so much of my identity in these different, like, affirmation groups.
Yeah.
And have a more nuanced position on the different views. And okay, I'll have my own opinion that maybe kind of situates myself between a centrist, if you will.
So you're trying to say that women should calm down.
Yes.
I was told centrists are the tailors for the brown shirts.
As we all know, if you tell a woman to calm down, that's the best technique. Oh, it works.
She will do immediately.
They'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was being a woman again."
Calm the fuck down, Kav.
Okay.
Cool with, like, black people, except no, not a cool thing to say. Don't say I'm cool with detrans people except when you're transphobic. Just say I'm cool with detrans people, right? Like, and then say I'm not cool with transphobia. But this language matters, the way we treat people matters, and it does have impacts on the way that detrans people talk about the trans community. And that is politically relevant, right? So both for the sake of being a decent human being and treating people who have had the same experience as us of complex body dysphoria, all that stuff feelings, treating them with empathy, but also, even selfishly for our own sake, we need to be empathetic to detransitioners. So that's where we're at. Detransition does happen, and not every detransitioner made a mistake. Some made the best decision given the information available to them at the time. It just didn't pan out. And that's the standard you should hold yourself to. You should make informed, forward-looking, healthy choices, not just because it might help you realize if you should transition, but also because it will make your life better as a trans person. Gender is hard, and we're all doing our best.
Next up, pain-free binding technique.
I know.
I saw that.
Huh. My film
I mean,
editing
that's
skills are
existing.
still choppy, but I'll get better. I promise.
Yeah,
You
that's fine.
fucking better.
It wasn't terrible.
Aw,
It was
poor
just
guy.
too many
That's-
cuts. Too many cuts.
Yeah, lots of
Yeah.
jump cuts.
There's a
All
lot.
around, I'd say that was a fairly good video, though. There are some
Yeah.
points I disagree with, but I genuinely would link this to people
Yeah.
about talking about the
Yeah.
subjects.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Pretty
I
good,
think it was
honestly.
pretty good. There's like small points that I kind of think either things are not emphasized enough or maybe weren't quite lined up right. But overall, very balanced. I think it's something that you could send to both trans and detrans people. It's not so obviously ideological that it would offend anyone.
Well, any final thoughts?
Keep at making videos and you'll get a lot better. That goes for you too, Cav. I'll
Aw.
crack the whip until you can make videos better than a filmmaker.
Hooray.
Oh, wow.
I'll be a true
Which
funny.
filmmaker though? Are we talking like Tommy Wiseau or
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Tommy Wiseau only
Yeah.
makes perfect
Who
movies.
Neil
can do
Breen.
better than Tommy?
Oh, hi,
Neil.
Mark.
Just remember that The Room is not an objectively bad movie.
That's right.
It's an objectively good movie. What are you talking about?
It's a subjectively amazing movie.
Correct.
Yes.
Well,
I
yeah,
think
Well,
I
objective
actually
truth.
really like this video. It was really good.
Yeah.
It's probably the least objectionable that we've
Oh,
talked
I think
about.
without a doubt, it's the least
For
objectionable
sure.
Yeah.
video we've
Almost
watched.
every
Look at
video
that.
we
We're
watched.
ready for D&D.
Ready for D&D. Hey, go be
All right.
non-binary elves or something.
Yeah, there you go.
Genders, get out.
I'm going to see if I can kill my aunt's character today.
That'd
All
be
right.
cool.
Okay.
Are you the player or the
Um,
DM?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of final thoughts on it. I mean, I pretty much said what I said during the video, so
Yeah, I think it was good. We had a good conversation around it.
yeah. All right. Well, are we going to say goodbye, boys?
I think so. Ready?
Have a great
Whip.
day.
Thank you
Yeah.
for those who came.
Goodbye, boys.
Goodbye, boys.
Bye bye. Bye bye.